Chapter 108. The first snowfall of the year came much earlier than usual. According to the records of the army, this was the earliest year in the last 300 years that Xiaolao City had officially seen snow. The snowfall did not mean that the weather would immediately turn cold, but it at least indicated a trend. Even more frightening was that for both sides, already exhausted to the extreme, this psychological suggestion might directly alter the course of the battle. In Xiaolao City, where the snow might not melt for half a year, human soldiers fighting in this sort of environment was no different from throwing away their lives. Everyone understood what this snowfall meant for this battle. In order to destroy the confidence that the demon soldiers had re-established, in order to shatter this inauspicious omen, even if it was just to make the human soldiers think less about this problem, Divine General He Ming had immediately launched another attack. The Western Army was also ordered to speed up the cleanup of the battlefield. At the most crucial moment, the human race displayed extraordinary courage and decisiveness, especially the experts. The Prince of Xiang had bravely gone to battle to make up for his mistake on Mount Noralang, but he was once more heavily injured. Xiao Zhang also appeared. The kite could fly over Mount Yinji, but it could not fly over the city walls, and once more disappeared. Liang Wangsun finally appeared on the battlefield, his golden lotus blooming in front of Xiaolao City. In the end, he was heavily injured and unconscious, so he was carried back to Xuanyang City. Liang Banhu had died in battle, Liang Hongzhuang had died in battle, and Liang Wangsun had been heavily injured. In this war against the demons, the Liang clan of the previous dynasty had disregarded their grudge with the Chen imperial dynasty and performed heroically. If Liang Xiao, who had colluded with the demons back then, were still alive and seeing this sight, what would he think? The solemn and stirring actions of the human experts and the mobilization of Divine General He Ming's troops somewhat alleviated the oppressive atmosphere brought about by this first snowfall. But as the snow continued to fall and the siege weapons were sent back in vain, the morale of the human army continued to drop. Just when Qin Changsheng and Su Yurong were prepared to act, something happened. To put it more accurately, a carriage had arrived outside Xiaolao City. This carriage was not a carriage, an ox cart, or a mule cart. It was not pulled by any animal, but it could still move forward on its own. This was rather mystical. The wheels crunched as they rolled over the snow and mud. It seemed slow, but they soon arrived at the barracks from the south. What was even more miraculous was that the long journey from the south to this place was tens of thousands of miles long. Who knew how many wounded soldiers and fierce bandits they had encountered along the way? But this carriage was actually able to come out unscathed without the protection of a single cavalry. Countless gazes fell on the car. The curtain of the carriage was lifted and a young Taoist stuck his head out. When he saw the tens of thousands of people on the plains, he covered his mouth in shock and quickly retracted his head. In a very short period of time, it was enough for many people to see clearly that the little Taoist was very good-looking. His skin was like jade, his eyes were like dots of paint, and he was full of spiritual qi. Am I stupid? Chen Changsheng retracted his gaze and looked at Su Yurong. He hesitated for a while and said, "Also, it's not that nice." Su Yurong knew what he was thinking and said, "You were prettier than him when you were young." Chen Changsheng said, "When we were young, we only wrote letters, but we never met." Su Yurong said, "This is what Lord Crane said." The cry of a crane came from the sky. The white crane was the witness. The small carriage stopped on a small mountain outside the battlefield. The curtain was lifted once more, and then it was hung up with a wooden hook. The young Taoist jumped onto the ground and helped the person in the carriage out. Countless gazes followed the movements of the small carriage, moving from the plains of the south to this small mountain. Even the cursing of the tribal warriors outside Xiaolao City had stopped. When they saw that young Taoist boy carved from jade, many people had already guessed at who was in the carriage. Just because it had secluded itself from the world for 10 years did not mean that the people of the world did not know what was going on in the monastery of Eternal Spring. Many people knew that a young Taoist boy had appeared in the monastery. As for whether or not that pair of master and disciple were venting their anger, who knew? Shang Xingzhou still came. Just when the morale of the human race was at its lowest at the most crucial and dangerous moment of this war. After several hundred years, he once more came to Xiulao City. Many people, including himself, had already guessed that this would be his last visit to Xiulao City. Other than the injured prince of Xiang, all the important figures of the army went to the small mountain to pay their respects. In the plains outside Xiulao City, dust was constantly rising from the small mountain. After living in seclusion in Luoyang for 10 years, Shang Xingzhou's reputation had not diminished, perhaps even increased. As he gazed at the dust rising from the plains, the worry on Linghai Zhuang's face gradually deepened. He turned to Chen Changsheng, wanting to say a few words of advice, but he knew that now was not the right time. Archbishop and Lin had returned from the most dangerous front lines, bringing back Guanbai's body. The hundreds of thousands of demon warriors outside Xiulao City had come from the various tribes. They could not obtain the complete trust of the imperial clan, but they truly did possess terrifying killing power on the battlefield. Chen Changsheng sat at Guanbai's side for a very long time. During the all-school martial exhibition, Guanbai had glanced at him from the side of the street. This was their first meeting. And then Wu Qianbai had entered the capital and tortured the stray dogs to death. And then Guanbai had lost an arm. Because of this matter, no matter what Biang Hong said, no matter how miserable Wu Qianbai ended up, Chen Changsheng had never forgiven her. He felt that a person like Guanbai was worthy of even more respect and had a better ending. He had not expected it to be like this in the end. Nothing more. Where's Liang Banhu? Chen Changsheng asked Archbishop and Lin. He remembered it very clearly. Because they had been the first to arrive at Xiulao City, the North Third Camp of the Eastern Army had always been a thorn in the side of the demon armies. There were many times when they had almost been surrounded. On a certain night, a few days ago, some major demon tribes had launched a joint counterattack, their target the North Third Camp. The battle that night had been rather bitter. Guanbai had led 1,000 orthodoxy cavalry to reinforce the enemy, and only at the final juncture was the danger averted. But Guanbai had died in battle, and Liang Banhu, one of the first 3 cavalrymen to arrive at Xiulao City, had also died in battle. Liang Banhu chose to self-detonate. Archbishop and Lin recalled the bitter battlefield, a sorrowful expression on her face. She hesitated for a while before saying to Chen Changsheng, I don't know if it was because he wanted to atone for his brother's crimes, but I heard that he was especially valiant on the battlefield. Chen Changsheng fell silent. He didn't know what he should say at this moment. Archbishop and Lin added, Guanfei Bai's mood is somewhat unstable. We have to think of a way to have him retreat. Chen Changsheng said, You and your aunt go discuss it. And Lin received the order and left. Linghai Zhuang asked, Shouldn't we go over there and take a look? Over there naturally referred to that small mountain. The mountain Shang Xingzhou was on. Up until now, Chen Changsheng had not gone over, nor had Linghai Zhuang and the other priests of the Li Palace. In truth, there were already many priests constantly looking over. Chen Changsheng was the pope and had an esteemed status, but he was still a student. If they did not go and pay their respects, it would be rather inexcusable. There's no need. Chen Changsheng pulled up the white cloth and covered Guanbai's face. He brought Linghai Zhuang out of the tent and gazed at the distant small mountain. He wanted to say something, but in the end, he said nothing. Just like this, Chen Changsheng was still in his own tent. Shang Xingzhou was still in his carriage. Teacher and student were separated by 100-some li, both silent. Occasionally, Chen Changsheng would glance in that direction. But Shang Xingzhou kept his eyes closed the entire time, allowing the not-so-warm demon sun to shine on his face as if he wanted to iron out some of the wrinkles on his face. Everyone, including the demons in Xiulao City, wanted to know what Shang Xingzhou would do next. It could be assumed that he would not just sit in a small carriage and watch the battle. On the morning of the next day, the crowd finally saw what Shang Xingzhou had done. He had hung a painting in the sky. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to cast a recommendation vote or monthly vote at Starting Point. Your support is my greatest motivation. Mobile phone users, please go to M. Chapter 109. A kite was drifting in the sky. In a remote corner, Wang Po wiped the mud from his face and squinted at the small mountain. He naturally recognized it as Xiao Zhang's kite. Hadn't that kite been smashed on the walls of Xiulao City a few days ago? A person had been tied to that kite before, but today it was tied to a painting. This painting was enormous, 10 zhang wide and tall. It gently swayed in the wind like a wave of wheat, but the scenery on the canvas was unaffected and extremely clear. Upon seeing this painting, the unfocused eyes of divine General Fei Dian, who had just been revived by a cinnabar pill, gradually began to focus and sharpen. 3 elders of a grain convoy on the plains of the south narrowed their eyes at the same time as they recalled the past. On the walls of Xiulao City, in the shadows of the hall, Black Robe's hands were hidden in her sleeves, a mocking smile on her lips. They had all seen the scenery in the painting. That extremely beautiful Sangarama temple that could not exist in the mortal world. The legacy of the Buddhist sect had been severed for countless years. The incense burning in Sangarama temple had lasted for a very long time. Until 1,000 years ago, it was finally destroyed in the fires of war. The demons invaded and Luoyang was besieged for 3 months. Only 3 out of 10 people in the city survived, and the common people suffered grievous casualties. A total of 60 million people were killed. Countless treasures of civilization, like Sangarama Temple, had been destroyed. As the saying goes, romance is all lost in a single torch. This painting depicted the burning of Sangarama Temple. Very few people had seen Sangarama Temple with their own eyes, but many people had seen pictures of Sangarama Temple in books, and many people knew of its story. As for the siege of Luoyang, it was a humiliation and misery that no human could ever forget. The huge painting hanging in the sky was very well drawn. It was vivid and lifelike, as if it was real. As they looked at the raging flames in the painting, the soldiers felt like they could hear the painful creaking of a building on the verge of collapse. The faces of many people in the painting were pained, twisted, confused, numb. In the end, these people had all died in that fire. Upon seeing this painting, the soldiers on the front lines once more understood a simple principle. This was history. This was the source of anger. This was why they had appeared in front of Xiulao City. As that painting and the information contained in it spread throughout the barracks, a conjecture also spread at the same time. It was said that Art Saint Wu Daozi painted murals in Sangarama Temple all year round. Could this one have been painted by him? Now, the entire continent knew that Taoist Wu was not dead, and that he was traveling the world with a certain someone. If Taoist Wu was here, did that mean that person was here as well? Thinking that a legendary figure like Wang Jitsa might show up at the front line at any time, the morale of the human army was boosted. In contrast, the morale of the demon race had suddenly plummeted, and the degree of improvement was even more exaggerated than on the human race side. To the human armies, Shang Xingzhou and Wang Jitsa had about the same influence. To the demons, it was completely different. They might not know who the current human emperor was, nor did they know Qin Changsheng. They might not know that Shang Xingzhou was the teacher of the human emperor and Qin Changsheng, but they definitely knew who Wang Jitsa was. At dusk, the setting sun dyed Xiulao City in the west red. Half of the city seemed to be on the verge of burning. Suddenly, countless fanatical shouts rang out from the plains below and above the city walls. These shouts sounded like Gulu and Mu. Many human soldiers could understand a few simple demon words, and they would never forget the meaning of this word. When the demon soldiers madly attacked, wanting to trade their lives for their own, when they were surrounded on a mountain and finally committed suicide, they would all shout this word. This word meant divine emperor. The demon lord had finally appeared. Qin Changsheng took the monocle from Linghai Zhuang's hands and gazed up at Xiulao City. The air today was especially clean, and the light of the setting sun did not affect his vision, allowing him to just barely make out the scene on the walls. Although it was rather blurry, Qin Changsheng still recognized that face he had not seen in many years. Compared to when he was in White Emperor City, the demon lord was much more composed, his expression even more dignified. When he saw the beard the demon lord had deliberately grown, Qin Changsheng thought of Tang 36, and then he saw the demon lord's demon horns. Logically speaking, the demon lord, as a member of the imperial clan, should not have demon horns, but he had made two, and he had even decorated them to make them seem especially exaggerated. It was obvious that this was a method to win the affection of the middle and lower class demons. Shang Xingzhou had arrived. The demon lord had appeared. This meant that the final battle was about to begin. To the demons, bitterly defending Shuilao City until winter came was naturally the best method. But they had no way of resolving the problem of provisions. This was exactly the same situation that Luoyang had faced. Even if they massacred the people and did their best to reduce the non-military population, they still had no way of resolving the rations for the hundreds of thousands of tribal warriors outside the city. Moreover, the human armies would not leave behind any of the bodies of their comrades. Time, place, and people were at peace. It seemed that the demons had the geographical advantage while the humans had the human advantage. As for the time, the recent snowfall seemed to indicate that the heavenly Tao favored the demons, but the time for the final battle was decided by the humans. So who would obtain the final victory in this war? It was another early morning. The plains outside Shuilao City were so quiet that it seemed like it had not awoken. The sound of a horn suddenly rang out. Thus the entire world awoke. All life in this world had been waiting for this moment. Perhaps no one had truly been able to sleep last night. The wolf cavalry, the main force of the demon race, fiercely attacked the human eastern army. The black soil of the plains was thrown into the air and rained down. The sounds of weapons clashing, grunts, and wretched howls could be heard everywhere, as well as the sounds of arrays being activated. The eastern army arduously withstood the tidal wave of attacks from the demons, finally obtaining a rare period of free time in the afternoon. The main camp issued an urgent order to the front lines, requesting that the troops at the very front retreat as quickly as possible and rotate with the reserve cavalry. Arrows danced through the air, suppressing the enemy pikemen and providing cover for their own side. All the processes were proceeding in an orderly manner, but there was a problem somewhere. The North Third Camp, which had been at the very front since the start of the battle, refused to retreat, because Guan Feibai refused to listen to military orders. He was not the commander of the North Third Camp, but he was a disciple of the Mount Li Sword sect, the strongest member of the army. Back then, he and his two junior brothers had risked their lives to charge up the cliff and were the first to reach Shuilao City. The entire North Third Camp now only listened to Guan Feibai. Guan Feibai was not willing to retreat for a very simple reason. His junior brother Liang Banhu had died, and Guanbai had also died to save them. His eyes were already red from the slaughter. At the most tense moment, accompanied by the cry of a crane, Su Yu Rong arrived at the scene. Guan Feibai gripped his sword and narrowed his eyes at her. His voice was hoarse and low to the extreme, like that of a wild beast that had not drunk water for many days. "Junior sister, don't try to persuade me." His narrowed eyes were a sea of blood. Su Yurong knew that while he seemed rational and spoke in an orderly manner, he had already gone mad and could not be persuaded. "I remember that senior brother Qiushan should have prepared a silk bag for all of you." Su Yurong looked into his eyes and said, "You should open it and take a look. Mother will begin her next course of chemotherapy tomorrow. I hope that everything goes smoothly. I will definitely have less time to write in the coming period, but there's no need to worry. I've already accumulated a few manuscripts in the last 10 days. I will do my best to constantly update them, and it seems that I should be able to do so. Thank you, everyone." To be continued. If you like this work, I welcome you to come to Qidian to cast a recommendation vote or a monthly vote. Your support is my greatest motivation. Mobile users, please go to M. Chapter 110. Guan Feibai's body trembled slightly. When they left Mount Li, eldest brother had prepared a silk pouch for each of them, saying that they could only open it at the most crucial moment. A few days ago, when the North Third Camp had fallen into a tight encirclement and the Orthodoxy cavalry had yet to send reinforcements, he noticed that Liang Banhu had opened the letter and was reading it by the bonfire for a long time. The next day, Liang Banhu died in battle. Was it his turn today? He took out the brocade pouch and opened it. There was a letter and a pill inside. In the letter, Qiu Jun said that this pill was the same pill that Xiao Zhang wanted to use to help him break through to the next level, but in the end, it caused him to go mad. After eating this pill, there is a small chance that it could greatly increase one's cultivation and even break through to the next realm. However, there was a higher chance that one's meridians would be completely severed. If it was less severe like Xiao Zhang, they would need to spend more than 10 years of hard work to recover. If it was more severe, they would die on the spot. Bai Kai did not see the contents of the letter, but seeing the change in Guan Feibai's expression, he vaguely guessed at something and desperately tried to dissuade him. Guan Feibai expressionlessly held the pill, completely ignoring what he was saying. Bai Kai turned to Su Yurong and sobbed. Why must you remind him of this matter? How can you blame Junior's sister for this? In the end, it's our own choice. Guan Feibai's expression was very calm. After saying this, he swallowed the pill into his stomach. In the next moment, he fell asleep. It's a knockout drug. Senior asked me to find Chun Changsheng to concoct it. Su Yurong said to Bai Kai, Liang Banhu also had one in his silk pouch, but I don't know why he didn't eat it. Is it because the contents of the letter are different? Seeing his senior brother being carried away like a drunkard, Bai Kai subconsciously rubbed his head and said, I still haven't opened the letter, so I don't know if it's the same. Su Yurong reached out her hand to stroke his head and said softly, Then come with me. Only then did Bai Kai realize that she had been trying to get information out of him. The ones attacking the Eastern Army were truly the main force of the demons. Other than the 10,000 wolf cavalry, there were also several times that number of soldiers from the various tribes. The most important evidence was that the commander of this demon army was the demon marshal. Separated by 10 some li, one could clearly see the massive figure of the mountain-toppling fiend. The previous mountain-toppling fiend had died in Noralang, but the demon commander had somehow managed to find another one. Wang Pa hugged his blade with one arm as he sat in the swamp, leaning against a tree that had been dead for many years. His eyes were closed, and he paid no attention to the sounds of fighting and death outside the mist. His injuries were far from recovering. If he wanted to block the demon commander, he had to cherish every ounce of strength he had. The reason why the demons would abandon the central camp and attack the Eastern Army was actually very simple, and anyone could understand it. Because everyone could see the small mountain on the outskirts of the battlefield. There was a car on the mountain. There was a little Taoist in the car. The little Taoist was flying a kite. Below the kite was a gigantic painting. It was a painting of the Sangarama temple burning. The wolf cavalry surged forward like a tide, but when they were still several li from the small mountain, they were blocked by the black armored cavalry. The war was carried out abnormally directly and crudely. Both sides' strategic intentions were very obvious, so naturally, there weren't many tactics to speak of. The entire wilderness seemed to be able to feel the tremors coming from the east and hear the sounds of fighting. I don't know if that side can still hold out, but I know that I won't be able to hold out much longer. Linghai Zhuang rarely used such a human tone to converse with Qin Changsheng. This was because he truly was under enormous pressure. The moment he walked out of his tent, countless gazes would be directed at him. These gazes were questioning, uneasy, disdainful, encouraging. They were incomparably complex and extremely sinister. The main force of the demons was attacking the Eastern Army, and that small mountain could be submerged by the black tide at any moment. At a time like this, everyone wanted to know what the Pope's stance was. The vast majority of priests and soldiers hoped that he would issue an order as soon as possible for the army to go to the rescue. Yes, not even Divine General He Ming had the right to issue such an order. Only Chun Changsheng himself could issue it. If there is no news from that side, we won't move. Chun Changsheng said. Tomorrow was the time to refine the cinnabar pill. He was considering whether he should cancel this batch of pills and save his energy for the upcoming decisive battle. Because the cinnabar pill had not saved the people he wanted to save. The battlefield was the place where one matured the fastest. Guanbai's hand was ice cold. His heart would not lose its warmth, but it would still be much stronger than usual. After a moment of hesitation, Linghai Zhuang asked, Is there a possibility that it is inconvenient for the other side to speak? For a master to ask a student for help in the end especially for this pair of master and disciple, who the entire world knew had a strange relationship. Truly was a very difficult matter. If this really was the case, and Chen Changsheng did not go to the rescue, what if something really did happen? Shang Xingzhou was a saint with an unfathomably deep cultivation, but he was still old, his body weak. According to the news from Luoyang, he had aged a great deal in the last few years. Nothing could happen to Shang Xingzhou because he was the spiritual leader of the human race. No matter how much they disliked him, they had to accept this fact. When he thought of the scene by the hot spring, the tightly bound black hair, and the white hair that could no longer be completely covered, Chen Changsheng fell quiet for a while. In the end, he just waved his hand. As the battle continued, the pressure from all sides grew more and more real. The gazes turned into letters from the Red Falcons, and some divine generals even attempted to break into the camp to seek an audience with Chen Changsheng. Chen Changsheng received these divine generals, but he did not agree to their requests. Su Yurong said, "The situation over there truly is rather grim. The North Third Camp will not move, but the Fourth Camp might have to go up." Chen Changsheng replied, "I know." Su Yurong said, "The pressure will only get greater and greater." Chen Changsheng gazed at the dust rising from the distant plains and mountains. After a moment of silence, he said, "When I was young and Shining, when the pressure came, it was always Senior Brother who blocked it for me. When I went to the capital, there was Marshal Uncle and Archbishop Meilisha, and later on, there was you. But in truth, my ability to endure pressure isn't bad." From the age of 10, he had begun to face the shadow of death. No one could endure pressure better than him. He continued, "The battle started too early. There's a problem. Yes, no matter how few provisions Shiwalao City had, they should have been able to hold on for a little longer, at least until the weather got a little colder." So Yuron also believed this. "What do you think? Master didn't ask me to help, which means that he doesn't need my help. I don't know what he's planning, and my abilities in this aspect are rather weak, so I can only cooperate as usual." Chen Changsheng looked at her and said, "Just like that time in White Emperor City, when you and Master planned everything, I just followed along." So Yurong thought this over and realized that he was right. In essence, Shang Xingzhou, and the Divine Empress were the same kind of person, while Chen Changsheng was a different kind of person. The survival of the human race required the former, but the latter was the goal. Perhaps this was why she liked him so much. "I like you." Su Yurong looked into his eyes and very seriously said this. Such a sudden confession had truly caught one off guard. Crucially, there were still many people around, and there were also people in the tent. Their conversation just now had not been intentionally hidden from anyone. Linghai Jiwang carefully wiped the magical artifact in his hand as if he had not heard a thing. Divine General He Ming's hand that was lifting the curtain froze in midair, just like the smile on his face. And Hua gazed at Su Yurong with stars in her eyes, feeling that the Holy Maiden was truly too extraordinary. This sort of scene could only occasionally appear, a lucky little flower blooming amidst blood and fire. The main theme of the battlefield was naturally war. Battles were happening everywhere, chaotic and bloody. To the south of Shiwalao City, in the plains with a circumference of several hundred li, these battles were constantly taking place. The soil here was brimming with humus, so black that it was intoxicating and rich to the extreme. Even if blood fell on it, it would not be particularly striking. But as the snow fell over the last few days, the plains were first painted in a layer of white, and then the red and green blood that greeted it made the scene even more ghastly. Even the most radical of artists in Shiwalao City would find it impossible to imagine such a combination of colors, such a clash of brush strokes. Feints, restraints, suppression, separation, encirclement, a tide-like push. After all these little tricks had been used up, the situation was still as clear as it had been at the start. The most tense and bitter battle was still taking place between the Demon Commander's Wolf Cavalry and the left army. The Demon Wolf Cavalry and Black-Armored Cavalry collided, tearing at each other and devouring each other. It was like the place where the river met the ocean. Waters of different colors constantly collided, stirring up massive waves that swirled into a vortex that could swallow up the entire sky. At the center of this vortex was that unremarkable small mountain. To be continued. If you like this work, I welcome you to come to Qidian to cast a recommendation vote or a monthly vote. Your support is my greatest motivation. For mobile users, please go to M. Chapter 111. The string of the kite had already been tied to the shafts of the carriage and floated in the air. The young Taoist boy did not dare to look at the bitter battle around him. He used his two small hands to cover his face, and when he occasionally stole a glance, his body would tremble in fear. The curtain of the carriage had already been lifted. Shang Xingzhou sat on the side of the carriage, his feet on the ground. If Chun Changsheng were here, he would realize that he truly was much older than he had been in Luoyang, his hair completely white. He gripped a fan in his hand and slowly waved it, his white hair drifting in the wind. He closed his eyes, listening to the sounds of fighting and blood splashing in the air. He did not feel any disgust, nor did he become intoxicated. He was very calm. Before the true end, everything he did and the people he met were just a journey. He was well aware why the demons were using all their strength to kill him. He naturally would not leave. What he wanted was to attract the demons' main force, while also providing them with some sort of evidence. This was a great fog that both sides needed. He also would not send any information to the Central Army camp. The more silent the Central Army camp became, the more the demons wanted to kill him. In these circumstances, if he were to die to the demons, many soldiers and priests would have a strong opinion of Chun Changsheng and Su Yorong, and the human armies on the front lines might even split. He knew that Chun Changsheng would be under enormous pressure, but he did not care. If he could not even endure this little pressure, what right did he have to be his student? After fighting from early morning until the autumn sun was high in the sky, the vanguard of the wolf cavalry finally broke through the heavy defenses of the black-armored cavalry and reached the small mountain. Yet those drooling and panting wolves were not even able to take a single step onto the small mountain before they were shot to death by several thousand sacred light crossbows. In a situation where the number of sacred light crossbows was dwindling, such a large volley was already a very rare sight on the battlefield. It could only be said that both Peng Shihai and the other officers and soldiers of the Eastern Army regarded Shang Xingzhou's safety with even greater importance than the heavens. The small mountain was surrounded by corpses and wounded. The human cavalry that had once more surrounded the small mountain conducted a simple cleanup. If they encountered a wounded demon soldier, they would naturally finish him off. If they encountered an injured comrade, they would be carried up the mountain and temporarily placed on the slope. Once the battle was over, the Li Palace clergy and the teachers and students of the 13 divisions of Radiant Green would come to treat them. They could only hope that the wounded would still be alive. The soldiers placed the wounded on the hillside, said a few words of comfort, and then left. Of course, before they left, they would not forget to kowtow to the car a few times. The little Taoist separated his fingers and revealed his dark eyes as he looked at Shang Xingzhou. Without opening his eyes, Shang Xingzhou said, "If you can't cure it, don't bother me." The little Taoist happily grunted and took out 2 straw ropes from his sleeves. He tied his wide sleeves tightly around his wrists and ran up the hillside. The slope was full of wounded soldiers, so naturally, no one stopped him. However, he did not bring the medical kit, so he did not know how to treat it. In the next moment, the little Taoist removed the golden needles from his fingers and started to apply the needles to stop the bleeding of those wounded soldiers. The expression on his little face was incomparably serious. He moved from one wounded soldier to another. His little face was red from the heat, and his forehead was covered in sweat. One of the wounded soldiers was wearing a felt hat that was not commonly seen on the battlefield. It covered most of his face, and the part that was exposed was faintly green. Looking at the wounded soldier, the little Taoist scratched his head and said, "Poisoned? I don't know how to treat it." Having said this, he had no choice but to temporarily give up on that wounded soldier and first stop the bleeding of the other wounded soldiers. After doing these things, he returned to the front of the carriage and looked at Shang Xingzhou with a sweet smile. In a crisp voice, he shouted, "Old ancestor, I've returned." In the next moment, the smile on the little Taoist's face turned into one that was on the verge of tears. It was obvious that he was extremely nervous as he silently said a few words. At some unknown time, Shang Xingzhou had already opened his eyes. He calmly nodded his head. The little Taoist nimbly squeezed into the carriage and hid behind him. Shang Xingzhou looked at those wounded soldiers on the hillside. His gaze followed the finger of the little Taoist on his shoulder and finally fell on the body of a wounded soldier. It was the wounded soldier wearing the felt hat and had a somewhat green complexion. Shang Xingzhou calmly looked at that wounded soldier. A shallow wrinkle gradually appeared at the corner of his eye. Gently blown by the wind, it became deeper and deeper. Suddenly, an extremely bright light appeared in his eyes. Several dozen zhang away, a crack in space noiselessly appeared at the throat of that wounded soldier. Spatial cracks were the sharpest existences in the world and could directly lead to the netherworld. Beads of blood appeared on the green skin and were slowly sliced apart. The wounded soldier suddenly opened his eyes, his body sinking into the ground like a sugar figurine in water. The spatial cracks sank into the ground with it. The wounded soldier's body transformed into a cloud of smoke that seeped out of the earth and spread throughout the hillside. Shang Xingzhou suddenly closed his eyes. The massive painting hanging in the sky by the kite was of Sangarama Temple burning. Suddenly, a young Taoist priest appeared in the blazing ruins. This Taoist priest had a handsome appearance, just like Shang Xingzhou when he was young. He looked around at the plains, his eyes so sharp that they seemed to be able to see all ghosts. In the painting, tinsome bright lights appeared in the clean eyes of the young Taoist priest. In the carriage, tinsome deep wrinkles appeared on Shang Xingzhou's face. Swish, 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 swish. Sharp sounds of cutting could be heard all around the small hill. The spatial crack gradually faded away. Black Robe's figure appeared. The clothes of the human cavalry had long ago been reduced to shreds and scattered away in the wind. The black robe that had protected him for 1,000 years had also been torn in several places. Bright red blood flowed out from some of the wounds. The legend was true. Black Robe really was a human. I didn't expect that I would be successfully ambushed by you. Black Robe looked at Shang Xingzhou in the carriage. His voice pierced through the hood. It was rather deep and sinister, but at this moment, it was tinged with emotion. Just as he had said, he had taken an enormous risk today, pretending to be a human cavalry and arriving in front of Shang Xingzhou in order to ambush and kill him. He had not expected Shang Xingzhou to see through his disguise and almost kill him with a sneak attack. Back then, your student used this move to kill my student, and now you're using it again. This repetition is truly disappointing. Shang Xingzhou's voice was devoid of emotion. It was so cold that it seemed like this person was not the demon military advisor or an old friend. He was naturally speaking of 10 some years ago, when the young demon lord had disguised himself as a heavily injured array master and had Chinchou and Ahua the Mount Song army headquarters carry him to the snowy mountains to find the master of the Cinnabar pill. Black Robe replied, "At the time, the person your majesty wanted to kill was Emperor Xian. It had nothing to do with Chen Changsheng." Shang Xingzhou replied, "No matter what, it's still an old trick, or else it wouldn't have failed to deceive even a student like me." The young Taoist boy intently listened from behind him, completely unaware of how important these words were to him. In the last 2 years, many people had learned that a young Taoist boy had appeared in the monastery of Eternal Spring in Luoyang, and they had paid great attention to the attendants around Shang Xingzhou. But Shang Xingzhou had never clearly explained just who this young Taoist boy was to him. Until today, when he said these words in front of Black Robe. Just what were the benefits of being Shang Xingzhou's student? One only needed to know that of the 2 students he had taken before him, one had become emperor and the other the pope. That was enough. Even Black Robe couldn't help but glance at the young Taoist boy. Although his plan today was nothing new, it actually had a very high chance of success. Who could have expected that a child would see through it? This was probably the meaning behind the phrase, profound fortune. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to cast a recommendation vote or monthly vote at Starting Point. Your support is my greatest motivation. For mobile users, please go to M. Chapter 112. You want to lock down my chi and soul and kill me in one blow? A very good idea. Alas, you didn't succeed because you're already old. Black Robe walked up to the small carriage. The cold wind blew through the holes in her black clothes, making them look like the war banners of the netherworld. Shang Xingzhou's eyes remained indifferent at this sight, but the young Taoist boy hiding behind him began to tremble in fear, his small face pale and his body trembling. The human cavalry around him had not sensed what was happening on the small mountain. It was obvious that Black Robe had used some sort of trick. The battle on the plains continued, and it was even more intense. The mountain-toppling fiend seemed to be getting closer. The second demon general suddenly led the tribal leaders and experts in an attack on the central army tent. Outside Shualao City, the sounds of fighting rang out, and all of this was to conceal the killing intent on the small mountain. Shang Xingzhou indifferently said, I truly am very old because I'm not like you. For the sake of living a few more years, you actually use such a disgusting method on your body. The once number one beauty in the world has become like this, neither human nor ghost. In the future, when you die, will you still have the nerve to meet that brother of yours? Shut your mouth. Black Robe's voice became shrill, echoing over the small mountain like a needle. In an instant, many small holes appeared on the painting in the sky. You people don't have the right to mention his name. Black Robe angrily shrieked. In the next moment, he calmed down. The entire process was abrupt and bizarre. His face, which was not covered by the hood, was green. Coupled with the faint smile that gradually appeared on his face, it was all the more bizarre. I will kill you, and then I will have my brother kill you again in the netherworld, kill you countless times. Shang Xingzhou's expression remained calm as he said, You first have to be able to kill me. After saying this, he suddenly started coughing. He coughed so hard that his straight back gradually bent like an old pine tree. The young Taoist boy supported his arm and constantly stroked his back. His eyes were moist as he called out in his childish voice, Ancestor, is Ancestor okay? Shang Xingzhou straightened his body with some difficulty and waved his hand. Look at your pitiful face, covered in wrinkles, and your head full of white hair. How can you possibly be a match for me? Black Robe looked at him and said, So die. The words go to hell could only be heard in the marketplace. Moreover, the people who said these words were usually shrews, and they carried some kind of curse. However, Black Robe said these three words very calmly and elegantly, because he did not mean to curse. He was merely stating a fact that was about to happen. His calmness hid some admiration that could not be expressed verbally, or perhaps it could be said that they appreciated each other's talents. After all, in the past 1,000 years of history, he and Shang Xingzhou should be the two most outstanding schemers. It was a pity that the final realization of any conspiracy still relied on force. Victory or defeat still depended on life and death. It seemed to be a little lacking in beauty. Black Robe disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already in front of the car. There was no link between the two images, as if they were two independent events. The mountaintop was silent. The grass sank slightly, revealing a few clear footprints. The afterimage of the Black Robe was like the tip of a giant pen against the greenish-yellow background. The ink was very full, as if it was about to draw a painting or a scroll of cursive calligraphy. This brush did not fall on the giant painting in the air, but on the car. Black Robe's thin and wizened finger, suffused with a faint green glow, stabbed at Shang Xingzhou's throat. A hint of regret appeared in Shang Xingzhou's eyes. As was said before, he and Black Robe were the two most outstanding schemers in the world. In truth, he also very much wanted to exchange blows with Black Robe. Alas, he truly was old. In the last tens of thousands of years, he was the only one who had succeeded in cultivating the canon of flowing west, and he understood the majestic power of time better than anyone else. Every night in the last 10 years, he had sensed the passing of his life and the dissolving of his soul. He was a legitimate successor of the orthodoxy and was not willing to use evil techniques to prolong his life like Black Robe, and his strength was also inferior. Just now, he had failed to lock down Black Robe's chi and soul, so now he could only wait for Black Robe to kill him. He was very regretful that he had not been able to fight with Black Robe at his peak. He did not need to fight to his heart's content, but rather to use all sorts of strange schemes to fight to the extreme. Besides this, he had no regrets. Like death, he had driven the car up the mountain precisely to lure the demons to kill him. Luring out Black Robe was already the best result he could think of. There was a small stream outside Xining Village's old temple, and there were many fish in the stream. Yuren and Chun Changsheng liked to watch the fish play by the stream, but his favorite activity was fishing. Whether it was koi or red thread, whether they were big or small, whether they were steamed or braised, they were all delicious. He was the world's most extraordinary old fisherman. Today, he had become the bait. So who could escape? The autumn sun was high in the sky, the brightest moment of the day. Black Robe's mood was as bright and beautiful as the sun. The brighter the surroundings, the darker the carriage seemed. His hand was still 2 feet away from Shang Xingzhou. He saw the regret in Shang Xingzhou's eyes, and he also saw the young Taoist boy's terrified eyes. But in the next moment, he saw a speck of white appear in the dark carriage. Just what was that ghastly pale white thing? It was not the face of a ghost demanding one's life, but a piece of white paper. Soon after, a biting cold light pierced through the darkness and slashed at Black Robe. It was incomparably bright, like someone had lit up a sun in the carriage. It was so cold that the grass on the slope was instantly covered in a thin layer of frost. What sort of light could simultaneously possess these 2 completely different chis? 10 some li away, in a swamp, Wang Po leaned against a withered tree, staring at the nearby mountain-toppling fiend, his expression extremely focused. Suddenly, he sensed something and turned his head to look at the small mountain. At almost the same time, the mountain-toppling fiend also turned in that direction. The demon commander's cold gaze suddenly became feverish, and then it rapidly cooled, filled with worry. The second demon general and the tribal leaders and experts attacking the central army tent also sensed the appearance of a powerful chi. Chen Changsheng and a few divine generals also sensed this chi. Su Yorong's perception was the clearest and most accurate, because she was the most familiar with this chi. When she was young, she had been very bored in the imperial palace, so she would often go play with that spear. Black Robe howled as he retreated with unimaginable speed. Snow clung to his eyelashes, and everything he saw was suffused with a rainbow light, including that spear that had pierced through the darkness. There was a soft squelch. Black Robe landed on the grass several dozen zhang away. A hole had appeared in the right side of his chest. Blood gushed out of it. It was an abnormally terrifying sight. Golden specks of light drifted out of the bloody hole, making it seem like a setting sun. "Why is this spear in your hand?" Black Robe looked at the carriage on the summit and angrily said, "Why are you here?" A breeze rustled the white paper. Xiao Zhang walked out of the carriage, a spear in his hand. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to cast a recommendation vote or monthly vote at Chidian. Your support is my greatest motivation. Mobile users, please go to M. Chapter 113. This spear seemed ordinary and unremarkable, even inferior to Xiao Zhang's own spear. But a spear that could injure Black Robe was assuredly extraordinary. This was the legendary Frost God Spear that Emperor Taizong had once used, ranked on the top of the legendary tier. In the end, your efforts are futile. All of you will inevitably fail. Leaving behind these cold words, Black Robe transformed into a cloud of black mist that dissipated from the chaotic battlefield. Xiao Zhang wanted to pursue, but his body swayed, and he almost fell to the ground. It seemed that his kite attack on Shuilao City a few days ago was true, and his heavy injuries were also true. But he didn't know when Shang Xingzhou had picked him up. Exchanging a kite for this spear for 10 years. Do you think it's worth it? Of course it's worth it. Xiao Zhang stroked the spear, his expression rather excited. To be able to personally hold the Frost God Spear was the dream of every spear user, and he was no exception. Shang Xingzhou shook his head. In his view, This was naturally casting pearls before swine. In truth, he had never believed that anyone had the right to use the weapon left behind by Emperor Taizong. But defeating the demons was urgent, and Xiao Zhang was the strongest spear user, so he could only reluctantly let him use it. Xiao Zhang raised his head to the distance where Black Robe had vanished and warily said, "I don't think that this matter is that simple." He had hidden in the carriage for several days, not letting out the slightest sound. He had built up his strength for a long time, and even with the power of the Frost God Spear, he had still failed to kill Black Robe. This was related to his heavy injuries, and it was also because Black Robe was too strong. But there was another possibility. Black Robe had never used his full strength from the very start. The demons truly do want me to die, even if it's just a few dozen days early. But this is not important enough for them to leave the city and start the decisive battle ahead of time, Shang Xingzhou calmly said. He could see further and more thoroughly than Xiao Zhang. The demons had started the decisive battle ahead of time in order to create chaos on the plains. The chaos was to conceal their true intentions. It now appeared that they were trying to assassinate him. But would the demon race have more complete arrangements in advance? If the assassination failed, they would use this as a means to divert attention. If this really was the case, what was the demon's true killing move? Shang Xingzhou turned to the south. In a war, the most important thing was naturally logistics. The most important thing in logistics was rations and fodder. If the military equipment was destroyed, they could rely on manpower to attack. If the sacred light crossbows were gone, they could still use ordinary arrows. In the most difficult moments, courage and willpower would often play a crucial role. However, if there were no rations and they were weak from hunger, how could they fight? If the dragon stallions couldn't even stand up, how could they march? Not to mention charging. The Great Zhou dynasty attached great importance to logistics, especially for this war. The relevant resources had been prepared for a full decade. If the 17 strongholds and the granaries to the north of Tianliang County were included, this sort of preparation could be traced back to the era of the Tianhai Divine Empress and Emperor Xian. There were even many plans that had been made in the era of Taizong. It was very difficult to collect and prepare provisions. What was more difficult and dangerous was to transport provisions, especially as the war went on and human armies gained successive victories. More and more of the journey of transporting provisions was in the territory of demons. They might encounter harassment or even large-scale ambushes at any time. In terms of safety and efficiency, the scale of the transport of provisions by the human armies grew larger and larger, and the number of cultivators accompanying them grew larger and larger. The most important transport teams would even be personally escorted by experts of the divine domain. Mao Qiyu had traveled from north to south several times. The war was now in its second half. Mao Qiyu was heavily injured and had returned to Mount Han to recover. Huai Run, the Mountly sect master, and the Prince of Xiang were also powerless to fight. Wang Po was responsible for keeping an eye on the demon commander. Even though he had not recovered from his injuries, he could not take a single step out of Shuilao City. Fortunately, the demons were in an even worse state. 3 experts of the divine domain had already fallen, and important figures like the demon commander and Black Robe, as well as the second demon general, could not leave Shuilao City, so they were still relatively safe. The Bureau of Revenue is taking the lead in matters of the imperial court, and the goods from the south are mostly prepared by the Tang and Mutuo clans. I don't understand why the Qiushan clan is in such a hurry. The logistics officer frowned as he looked at a carriage in the convoy. The Qiushan clan head and that legendary guardian half a step from the divine were in that carriage, placing an enormous pressure on the entire convoy. The subordinate officer replied, "Everyone knows that the Qiushan clan head loves his son like an idiot. For him to be willing to expend so much energy, presumably it has something to do with Qiushan Jun." The logistics officer thought of the rumors and mocked. So he's trying to regain face from Mountly. This was referring to the northern expedition many years ago. The Mountly sword sect, disciple responsible for transporting the grain, had been late for some reason and was almost executed on the spot by Jin Yilu. No one could plead for mercy. In the end, The sect master of the Mount Lee sword sect had used the secrets of the Mount Lee sword style to request the White Emperor to appear and save the lives of those disciples, including Xiao Songgong. Xiao Songgong's execution in the internal strife of Mount Lee was a different matter. To the Mount Lee sword sect, this was the only stain in the memories of the common people, if one did not count Su Li. The Mount Lee sword sect was currently presided over by Qiushan Jun, and the son of the True Dragon, who had been rather quiet in the last few years, naturally hoped to use this war as an opportunity to wipe away this stain. Perhaps it was precisely for this reason that the Qiushan clan was so proactive, agreeing to every request of the imperial court and even taking the initiative to join the army heading north. It's not just a matter of face. The subordinate officer said, "I heard that Lord Jin Yulu personally said that if this matter was handled properly, he would return the secrets of the sword style to Mount Lee after the battle." The logistics officer froze, then said with some envy, "That's too simple." If someone else had said these words, he might not have believed them, but since Jin Yulu had personally said them, he had no choice but to believe them. After the battle began, the demi-human reinforcements left Song province and circled around the plains, never arriving on the battlefield. The Great Zhou dynasty was already furious and had a great deal of opinion, but no one had any opinion of Jin Yulu, much less any doubt. This was the awe-inspiring reputation created by history, and it was also because even now, he still played an extremely important role in this war. All matters related to the logistics of the army were currently handled by Jin Yulu. Regardless of whether they were big or small, they were all decided by his word. This was the privilege and trust that the Emperor and Pope of the Great Zhou had bestowed upon him, but at the same time, it was also an extremely frightening pressure. Several hundred officers from the army, old officials from the Ministry of Revenue, accounting masters from the Tang clan, secretaries of money and provisions from the Wu clan, 2 servants he had brought with him from White Emperor City, and his deputy, Tang 36. These were all his subordinates, helping him share this pressure. Many of those old officials and accounting masters had already fallen ill from exhaustion. Tang 36's fever had not subsided, and he had been sent to Mount Han. Jin Yulu was so thin that only bones remained, but he still persisted. He had won the reverence of all the soldiers. In reverence, there was the word fear. The logistics officer gazed at the distant mountain range, his body trembling. He inwardly hoped that nothing would go wrong. The supply carts of this convoy could guarantee the soldiers on the front lines 20 days of rations. It could be said to be an extremely important transport. It was composed of 30,000 civilian laborers and several thousand large carts. Connected from head to tail, it was several dozen li long, a rather spectacular sight. With 3,000 cavalry and the experts of the Qiushan clan escorting it, there was absolutely no need to worry about being harassed by demon soldiers, and there was certainly no danger of having their rations stolen. However, the road was long and no one knew what would happen. If they were late by even a day, not only would they be sentenced to death, they would also be punished with a stick of military law. At this moment, a general rode up to the carriage of the Qiushan clan head and whispered a few words to him. After a moment, the deep voice of the Qiushan clan head rang out from the carriage, followed by shouts from all around. The stewards and guards of the Qiushan clan turned solemn, and the convoy began to move faster. The clopping of hooves was like a torrential downpour. The cavalry constantly overtook the supply convoy, heading into the distant plains. While scouting, they also cleared the road. It seems like we'll have to pass through Noralang before nightfall. The logistics officer raised his horsewhip and pointed at the distant mountain range. Then tomorrow, we'll see the starry gorge. From the plains, one could see a mountain range towering against the sky. From the sky, one could see 5 mountain ranges stretching across the plains. Noralang was the tallest of these mountains. Whether it was demons or humans, they were used to calling this mountain range Noralang. No one had expected that 1,000-some demon wolf cavalry would be hiding in a certain cliff on the western foothills. The giant, bloodthirsty wolves with festering fur had their mouths open, emitting a foul stench. The eyes of the emaciated demon cavalry burned with a dark green light. But whether it was these vicious and untamable giant wolves or the demon cavalry, they all maintained absolute silence, not making a single sound. The leader of the wolf cavalry was still very young, his face even somewhat immature, like he was still a teenager. But his eyes were extremely old, like he had seen all the affairs of the world and experienced countless pains. Burn all their rations. He calmly looked at the wolf cavalry and said, and then die in the final charge. If you like this work, I welcome you to come to Qi and cast a recommendation vote or monthly vote. Your support is my greatest motivation. Mobile users, please go to M. Chapter 114. At the beginning of the summer, the greatest battle between the humans and demons took place here. Divine domain experts from both sides entered the battlefield one after another. The demons suffered grievous casualties while the humans also paid an enormous price. Not once had so many divine domain experts appeared on the battlefield at the same time. There was a large array at the base of Mount Noralang. The demon army had used this array to launch their assault and then retreat. Mao Qiuyu and Daoist Siyuan, the two most skilled in the divine arts, had personally confirmed that the array could no longer be used. Since then, many human armies had passed through this valley to the north, and no problems had occurred. No one could have imagined that when the demon army retreated, not all of them had left. When Wang Pe and the demon commander had clashed, the battlefield had been in chaos. 2,000 wolf cavalry had taken advantage of the chaos to hide in the mountains of the western foothills. The mountains of the western foothills had been in contact with the watery clouds drifting over from the western sea for a longer period of time. After millions of years of erosion, many caves of various sizes had appeared. These wolf cavalry had hidden themselves in the deepest parts of these caves, avoiding the sharp gazes of the red falcons and the spiritual senses of the human scouts. Of course, this was also because Divine General He Ming had ordered the army to move forward quickly in order to break through the demons' second defense line. As a result, the battlefield had not been carefully cleaned up. The human army continued to pass through the valley, heading north to continue the battle. These 2,000 wolf cavalry remained hidden in the caves, eating dried meat when they were hungry and chewing on the snow on the mountain peaks when they were thirsty. They lived an abnormally arduous life. If they had not made preparations beforehand, they would have starved to death long ago. Even so, after hiding for so many days, the wolf cavalry had suffered many casualties, the number of wounded and sick increasing. The wolf cavalry whose wounds were too severe to be treated were immediately executed, while the sick had their weapons and armor taken from them and thrown into the caves to wait for their conditions to improve or die. In the end, 1,200 wolf cavalry survived. They were thin and exhausted, but also determined and fearless. Their eyes glowed with a dark green light, making them seem like true wolves. Hiding for so long was extremely difficult, but the most difficult of all was the temptation. Human grain convoys would often pass through the plains at the foot of the mountain. The guards of these convoys were not very strong, and no one would think that there were demons hiding in the mountains. As long as the wolf cavalry charged down the mountain, they would be able to easily defeat them and obtain the grain. However, they knew that they had been hiding for so many days not to rob an ordinary supply team, but to deliver the heaviest blow to the human army at the most critical moment of the war. The reasoning was very clear, but to be able to make these savage wolf cavalry resist this temptation, it had to be said that the leader was truly extraordinary. His orders were also very unusual. Burn all their food, then let us die in the final charge. There was no fear in the eyes of the demon cavalrymen, only excitement and fanaticism, but they did not make any sound, and the bloodthirsty giant wolves only panted a little faster. This was also a military order, and it had been maintained for many days, so much so that some of the cavalrymen doubted whether they could still speak. 1,200 wolf cavalry descended the mountain. The leader's line of sight moved downwards, finally landing on the distant prairie on the grain transport team that stretched for more than 10 miles. The relevant information had already been confirmed. The number of human cavalry, the number of experts, and most importantly, the amount of food. He knew that Xiualao City had already begun its counterattack to divert the attention of the humans and also to keep the enemy's main force of cavalry below the city. All of this was to create the conditions for him to burn all the food in this convoy. If he succeeded, the demon army outside Xiualao City would retreat to the city as quickly as possible. The 200,000 tribal warriors outside the city would be mercilessly abandoned. As far as he was concerned, it didn't matter to him how many of those low-level devils with low intelligence who were no different from demon beasts died. In any case, those low-level demons were not loyal, nor were they brave enough in battle. If not for the fact that he had not brought back enough medicine from the longevity sect, this battle would not have been so difficult. At that time, unless the human army was willing to use the meat of those low-level demons as food, they would have to retreat before winter arrived. Given his understanding of a human race, this hypocritical race would never do such a thing. Thus, Xiualao City would gain half a year. Half a year was enough time for many things to happen. Moreover, the morale of the human race would suffer a severe setback. He truly had a deep understanding of a human race. He was confident that when the time came, the internal problems of the human race would slowly surface. So, this was the final battle. He silently thought to himself as he gazed at the convoy. If we win, we can continue to exist. If we lose, we will cease to exist. This young leader was called Gao Huan, and he was already more than 1,000 years old. 700 years ago, he had already been the chief elder of the Demon Council of Elders. He was the youngest chief elder of the demon race in all of recorded history. But on the day he became chief elder, he was imprisoned in the abyss by the powerful demon lord. He was imprisoned in the abyss for 700 years. Only this year was he released by the new demon lord. His face was pale and thin, but he was still alive, and just like 700 years ago, he seemed like a youth. Plumes of dust appeared over the plains. The wolf cavalry began to attack the convoy. Because they were very far away, the sounds of fighting could not reach the summit. This place was still very quiet. He gazed at the scene on the plains and began to sing a song. This song was written in one of the most ancient languages of the demon race. It was weathered and desolate, and its meaning was very simple. When the bright moon shone, the rainbow clouds returned. The song gradually faded away, and when it finally stopped, it was clear that it had not truly reached its end. As he gazed at the distant plains, a hint of solemnity appeared on his young face. His clean and pure eyes were suffused with a powerful killing intent. Naive and cruel was a perfect description of him. The attack of the wolf cavalry did not proceed as smoothly as imagined. They quickly encountered obstacles, even difficulties. At the start, the human convoy had not expected Mount Noralang to have so many wolf cavalry, and a surprise attack threw them into disarray. But this chaos quickly settled. The convoy, which stretched for several dozen li, quickly divided into 10-some sections. The large carriages moved as quickly as they could, forming a circular formation of carriages. The several thousand cavalry were divided into 3 groups that worked with the formation of carriages to block the attacks of the wolf cavalry. Everything was carried out in an extremely orderly, calm, and steady manner. Gao Huan was not surprised that the human army possessed this quality, although it was completely different from the army he had seen in Luoyang. If the human army could not even do this, how could they have forced the divine race army to retreat again and even surrounded Xiualao City? What truly put him on guard was the ease with which the human army had displayed this entire process. Even an ever-victorious army would find it very difficult to cultivate this sort of demeanor, especially when they were suddenly ambushed by more than 1,000 wolf cavalry. This sort of ease made it seem like they had been prepared. The demon wolf cavalry madly attacked the supply convoys, carrying with them an aura of no return. The defensive line formed by the several thousand human cavalrymen immediately seemed rather thin and on the verge of collapse. Finally, it was breached in the northwest, and the battlefield entered the bloodiest phase of attack and defense. Heavy black axes silently streaked through the sky, cleaving the carriages in two while simultaneously beheading a peasant. Tinsum's sacred light crossbows shot out from the gaps in the formation of carriages, all of them striking the chest of a tall demon soldier. Divine flames burst forth from the crossbows, burning his caramelized body. There was not a single sound during this entire process. Death occurred at every moment. Blood of different colors, carrying the same will, continuously splashed between the heavens and the earth. In a very short period of time, more than 300 wolf cavalry had fallen to the plains, no longer able to stand. Even more human cavalry and officers of the convoy had stopped sucking in blood. Such a gruesome battlefield did not cause any change in Gao Huan's expression. He stood on the cliff of the western mountain, quietly waiting as he gazed at the scene on the plains, his young face devoid of emotion. To him, whether it was the human soldiers or the demon wolf cavalry that had been hiding with him for so many days, they were all ants. He looked like a youth, but he was actually extremely old. And this wasn't even considering the fact that he had endured in that dangerous world at the bottom of the abyss for more than 700 years. His demon body was beginning to rot from the very inside and could not last for much longer. To put another way, he could not attack with his full strength too many times, so he had to make sure who was the most worthy target for him to attack. He was currently observing, wanting to find the commander of the human army and those experts hiding in the carriages that were still unwilling to attack. Time slowly passed, and the sun gradually set in the west. The shadows cast by the mountains over the plains gradually began to spread, on the verge of swallowing up those creatures engaged in fierce battle. The defenses of the human supply convoys were broken one after another. Many of the carriages set aflame. From a distance, they looked like sparks of fire, but they were quickly extinguished. The most dangerous was the first circular carriage array to the north. It was on the verge of being directly broken by the wolf cavalry, and the officers and peasants were fleeing with the help of the cavalry. It seemed like they were prepared to give up, but the demon wolf cavalry had also reached their limit. They had come with the resolve to die, and after such a long and frenzied assault, they had finally broken through one of the chariot formations. However, the enemy still had 10-some chariot formations, and more importantly, too many of their comrades and brothers had fallen on the plains. Less than half of the wolf cavalry remained. On the battlefield, when both sides were on the verge of collapse, a change would often occur. This was what the situation and will required, and today was no exception. Today, there were no clouds in the sky a faint red from the setting sun. Suddenly, a white line appeared. This white line was perfectly straight, with one end in the western cliffs and the other in the plains. A great wind howled, rustling the grass and the gravel in the grass, causing the atmosphere to grow cold. Several thousand drops of rain suddenly began to fall from the sky, falling on the faces of the people in the carriage array. It was rather cool, but the taste was so faint that it was baffling. At some point, a youth had appeared at the top of the tent. His clothes were rather dirty, but they were made of an incomparably gorgeous material. He wore a soft armor woven from the thorns of the monster bull's tail, and other than that, he had no other adornments. There was only an incomparably bright gem embedded in the center of his helmet, but it was unable to conceal the luster exuding from his young face. An expert of the divine domain. Shocked and despairing cries rose up. Mr. Huang Yi, rest in peace. To be continued. Chapter 115. Gao Huan looked at the carriage in front of the tent. The carriage suddenly shattered. It wasn't just his gaze that had such power. The Qiushan clan head sword slashed through the air amidst the flying sawdust and dust. He was a peak star condensation expert, and his sword was the reverse scale that Qiushan Jun had insisted he bring with him, a divine artifact ranked at the top of the tier of legendary weapons. The cold and somber sword glow shot toward the roof of the tent. Gao Huan's body flickered, and he was on the ground. His expression did not change, nor did he attack the Qiushan clan head. After being imprisoned in the abyss for 700 years, not seeing the sun, moon, or stars, he was extremely unfamiliar with the current world and its experts. He could only divide the people he saw into two types, those he recognized and those he did not. old friends that had lived for as many years as he had naturally deserved his vigilance. Other people had no right to waste his energy. Though his sword had failed, the Chioshan clan head showed no shame, nor was he angry. He retreated into the dust. With a light slap, a middle-aged man that looked like an ordinary servant stomped on a small copper wine pot on the ground. At the same time, the middle-aged man's fist arrived in front of Gao Huan. Gao Huan's expression flickered as he reacted. With another light slap, 3 cracks appeared on the ground where he stood. At the same time, his hand clenched around the fist. The middle-aged man was a guardian of the Chioshan clan and was already half a step from the divine, yet his fist had been easily caught in Gao Huan's hand. The gap between cultivation levels was not something that could be made up for with courage or strategy. The Chioshan clan guardian's face was pale, his eyes seeming to blaze with golden fire. With a clear whistle, he rapidly retreated. Several dozen white streams of energy appeared in the air, releasing deafening explosions. The Chioshan clan guardian grunted as he smashed through the carriage and landed several hundred zhang away. His clothes were covered in blood, and he had broken countless bones. Gao Huan drew back his hand and turned to a carriage even further ahead. Just like a certain logistics officer had once sighed with emotion, the human soldiers had always believed that the Chioshan clan head and guardian were naturally the strongest of the group. Gao Huan did not believe this. His gaze had never been on the tent, nor on the Chioshan clan's carriage, but on this carriage. He felt that the true commander of this group was in this carriage. As long as they killed the people in the car, they would be able to win this surprise attack. This was the conclusion he came to after observing the cliffs for a long time. Following Gao Huan's gaze, a dozen or so demon experts left their respective cavalry squads and attacked the carriage. The whistling sound of the wind continuously sounded, and the devil race masters, like stones, smashed down from the sky. If no one stopped them, no matter who was in the carriage, they would be smashed into meat paste. At this moment, a mournful and cold melody came from the carriage. The sound of the zither rose from the ground into the sky. The sound did not grow louder, but the area it covered became much larger. Cracks appeared on the armors of the devil race experts, and green smoke seeped out. In the end, the direction of their fall deviated, and they failed to hit the carriage. Instead, they landed around it. The earth shook, and black soil rushed up like a waterfall. The scene was exceptionally spectacular. The blind zither player walked out of the carriage with his zither in his arms. He tilted his head and listened to the sound around him, his right hand plucking the strings from time to time. Like sharp blades, white streams of energy left the zither and attacked the devil race experts, filling the sky with fallen leaves. The tinsome devil race experts howled and charged at the carriage. If it was just the blind zither player alone, it would truly be rather strenuous to stop so many devil race experts, but there were other people in the carriage. The carriage did not seem very large, so no one had expected so many people to come out of it. 7 peddlers, 6 government laborers, 3 fortune tellers, 2 sesame candy-selling elders, and a girl who sold cosmetic powder. Several profound and unfathomable heavenly secrets enveloped the grassland around the carriage and fell on the bodies of the devil race experts. Several chains flew through the air, stained with blood and fire, vowing to pierce through the necks and shoulders of the devil race experts. Before this, a formation formed by a sand table had already protected the carriage in advance. Gao Huan slightly raised his brows at this sight. He didn't expect that there were so many experts in the human clan. Then, a naive smile appeared on his face. With so many human experts, it was worth it for him to strike. Light and odorless raindrops once more fell from the sky, washing away the profound and unfathomable heavenly secrets and casually breaking the array. Five-Kind Man from the Wenshui Tangs had an abnormally solemn expression, and the blind zither player's fingers began to pluck at the strings even faster. This young demon expert truly did have an unfathomable cultivation. Without even moving, he had broken through the outer defenses. Gao Huan lightly flicked his fingers, sending 2 rods of water and fire flying. His gaze fell, severing a chain and arriving in front of the carriage. He wanted to raise the curtain and see just who was inside. The zither clattered like a bugle horn, a string brimming with the will of iron and blood in front of him. This was fine. Of the human experts, the blind zither player was naturally the strongest. Galwan did not mind first focusing on killing him. A faint black mist emerged from his fingers. No matter how strong the winds of the grassland, they could not blow it away. The zither string withered at a visible rate, and then snapped, losing all vitality. Blood leaked from the corner of the zither player's mouth as he retreated to the side of the carriage. Galwan would not let him live, and he slapped down with his palm. The twilight suddenly dimmed as if night had come early. A pitch-black palm that was not real descended from the sky, slapping at the carriage. One of the zither strings snapped, but several were still intact, but they could no longer produce any sound, as the blind zither player had not recovered his chi. Who would block this gigantic palm? The car window suddenly broke, and two black objects flew out. They were both black, but unlike the black palm, which exuded a terrifying and oppressive aura, these two objects were brimming with majesty. An official seal and a gauntlet. The official seal and gauntlet collided with the black palm. With two clattering sounds, the official seal and gauntlet were shattered while the black palm gradually dissipated into the air. A thin old man dressed in a gray robe walked out of the carriage, his expression calm. Several youths walked out with him, their expressions rather nervous, as if they were students. Too many people had walked out of the carriage, and no one had expected so many people to be hiding inside. Galwan had also not expected to encounter 3 human experts half a step from the divine in such a short amount of time. When did half step from the divine become so common? Galwan confirmed that he did not recognize any of these human experts, but the blind zither player's technique was rather familiar. He turned to the blind zither player and arched his brows. The longevity sect? The blind zither player replied, yes. Galwan arched his brows and asked, Li Mingi. The blind zither player's expression flickered as he replied, my master. Galwan proudly said, so that's how it is. Your master and I are old friends. If you surrender to me, I will spare your life today. After saying this, he turned to the gray-robed elder and asked, and who are you? A youth replied, this is my clan's lord minister. I don't recognize him. Galwan's expression was indifferent as he harshly yelled, you dare to use poison on me. He turned to the girl who had remained silent this entire time. Perhaps because she had been caught up in the battle, the basket the girl was carrying had toppled to the ground. The powder was blown about by the wind, gradually spreading. Anyone would think that this was a very natural sight, but who could have expected that it was actually a method of poisoning? Galwan's eyes were brimming with brutality as he gazed at the girl. You know who I am? You actually want to poison me to death? In Wenshui City, the girl's shyness and nervousness had mostly been an act. But now that she was being stared at by this demon expert, she was truly so nervous that she couldn't even move her feet. Separated by several zhang, Galwan extended a hand towards her throat, his expression savage as he prepared to tear her to pieces. The blind zither player and Minister Wei were on the other side, unable to save her in time. The peddlers and fortune-tellers were still entangled with the remaining demon experts. Fortunately, there were still 2 sesame candy-selling elders. They had always been used to standing with the cosmetic-selling girl. One of the sesame candy-selling elders pulled up a green cloth from his stall and used it to block the wind from Galwan's fingers. With a rip, the green cloth was torn to shreds and carried away by the wind, transforming into the elder. He bent his knees, lowered his waist, calmed his mind, clenched his fist, and then punched. At this sight, Galwan yelled, good. This punch was simple and ordinary, but in the eyes of a true expert, it possessed the true essence of fairness and gentleness. If this was all, Galwan would not have been moved. He was cheering because this sesame candy-selling elder was using the most orthodox technique of the imperial clan, the blazing sun style. Galwan waved his sleeve to block the combined attacks of the blind zither player and Minister Wei, then clenched his fist and smashed it at the sesame candy-selling elder. Countless rays of light scattered from the elder's fist. Black smoke seeped out of Galwan's fist. Just like the sky at this time, day and night were engaged in the most decisive battle. His cultivation level was far higher than the sesame candy-selling elders, but he was the most solemn when dealing with this elder, placing great emphasis on integrity. His opponent was using the supreme technique of the human imperial clan, so he was going to use the supreme technique of the demon god imperial clan. Heavenly demon art. Sensing the tyrannical chi that spanned the world and the demon chi thicker than the darkness, the blind zither player blurted out. Upon hearing these words, Minister Wei and the newly awakened Qiushan clan had instantly paled. Just who was this demon expert? Why did he know the supreme technique of the imperial clan, the heavenly demon art? There was a massive boom. The sesame candy-selling elder was unsurprisingly sent flying. If not for the fact that the blazing sun style and the heavenly demon art innately countered each other, his injuries might have been even more severe. There was also the sesame candy-selling elder. Gao Huan's expression remained serious, because this represented the meeting between the imperial clan and the imperial clan. As for the battle itself, he didn't take it too seriously. These two sesame candy-selling elders were far inferior to the young masters of the Chun clan of Tianliang County. It was a light clap. The two fists collided. It was a light clap, not a thunderous boom. What did this mean? Gao Huan, who had already turned his head to look at the blind zither player and Minister Wei, slowly turned his head back. The attacking demon experts had already been pushed back. The shouts of the wolf cavalry seemed to be getting further and further away. The grassland suddenly became very quiet, the only sound being the crackling of the burning provisions. Gao Huan looked at the sesame candy-selling elder, a hint of pain and confusion in his eyes. The elder slowly raised his head. His hair was completely white, but he did not seem too old. It was just that his eyes were too calm, like that well in the old Wenshui estate. That old well. There was nothing in the world that could cause his eyes to ripple. To be continued. Chapter 116. Gao Huan did not look at the eyes, but the old man's eyebrows. He remembered very clearly that there was a mole between his eyebrows. As expected, there was a mole. Gao Huan suddenly felt a great pain. Heartache. The moment he saw that mole, he knew that he had been tricked. Since the enemy was here, his surprise attack could not possibly succeed. This also meant that this war would end with the human race's victory. This was naturally a matter worthy of heartache, especially to him. Tang San, Tang Jingtian. Gao Huan madly yelled and soared into the sky, about to leave. There was a clattering of metal as several chains flew through the air, straight as a spear, wrapping around his ankles. At the same time, several zither strings pierced through the soft armor woven from the monster bull's tail. Minister Wei took a brush and wrote a few large words. An array obscured the sky. The Tang Old Master flew up and punched Gao Huan in the chest. Blood wildly sprayed. Gao Huan's young face was covered in blood and madness, but he was still prepared for one last struggle. Yet, out of the corner of his eyes, he suddenly noticed that the flames on the plains were growing dimmer and dimmer. Dusk was already deep, turning into night. Logically speaking, those flames should be getting clearer and clearer. So why were they so faint? Had they been extinguished? This was impossible. In Gao Huan's plan, burning the provisions of the human army had always been the most important goal, far surpassing killing human experts. He led those devil race experts to rush into this formation of carriages in order to attract the attention of other places. His method had succeeded to a certain extent. In the battle just now, the wolf cavalry had succeeded in setting many of the supply carriages on fire. If nothing unexpected happened, those supply carriages would have been burned to ash by the end of the array. Why had those fires been extinguished? It had to be known that the wolf cavalry had not carried ordinary fire seeds, but oil fire from the frigid sea of the extreme north. Even water and sand would find it very difficult to extinguish them. The entire world gradually grew quiet. Gao Huan stood on the grassland in despair. He did not do anything else. Golden blood dyed his body, and in the last rays of the twilight, he seemed particularly tragic. He was actually a pure-blooded member of the imperial clan. What did it mean for such a member of the imperial clan to become the chief elder of the Council of Elders? It was no wonder that the previous demon lord had been so apprehensive of him that he had disregarded the shock of the entire court to forcefully eliminate him. Countless gazes fell on Gao Huan, and then on the Tang Old Master. To the people of the world, the Tang Old Master was unquestionably the most famous and most mysterious person. In the last 200 years, he had never left Wan Shui, not even when Mou brought out the Tianhai Divine Empress's imperial decree and besieged him. The Tang Old Master looked at Gao Huan and indifferently asked, "You recognize me?" Only now did many people recall the words this demon divine domain expert had shouted upon seeing the Tang Old Master. Tang San, Tang Jingtian. It was a very simple sentence, but it revealed at least 3 facts. The Tang Old Master's name and rank, as well as the fact that this demon expert knew the Tang Old Master. "We met many years ago in Luoyang," Gao Huan said to the Tang Old Master. "I thought that you remembered." The Tang Old Master calmly gazed at him and said, "So it was you. Haha, no wonder you know how to say a few human words." Yes, Gao Huan's human language could not be compared to those dukes and nobles in Shualao City who were only interested in human language. He was truly very familiar with it. But the Tang Old Master's words clearly had a double meaning. Anyone could hear the mockery and harshness in them. It turned out that he also knew this person. "Gao Huan, Gao Yanshan." The Tang Old Master stared into his eyes and said, "I thought that you died long ago, but I think that you probably want nothing more than to die a long time ago." Gao Huan, courtesy name Yanshan. This was his human name. He was a pure-blooded descendant of the demon imperial clan with outstanding talent, and also the last demon to study in the human race. The Tang Old Master knew that he had once been a disciple of the longevity sect, but he had truly met him in Luoyang. Luoyang had been surrounded and Gao Huan's identity exposed, but no one dared to kill him, as the demon army outside the city had singled out his safety. The Tang Old Master and his companions had wanted to assassinate him, but their elders had stopped them. If Shang knew that you were still alive, he would definitely be extremely happy. The Tang Old Master looked at Gao Huan and said, "The one who wanted to kill you the most back then was him." Gao Huan replied, "If you had dared to attack me back then, I would have crushed you with a single finger." The Tang Old Master agreed. "Yes, you were much stronger than us back then." Gao Huan sneered. "If you hadn't ambushed me today, I might not have lost." The Tang Old Master shook his head. "Wrong. Even if you won today, you would still have lost in the end." Gao Huan slightly arched his brows. "Why?" The Tang Old Master replied. "Because we waited for 1,000 years. If we still couldn't win, it would be too unreasonable." Gao Huan said, "We also surrounded Luoyang for a very long time, but you also didn't lose. Luoyang is not Shualao City, and the greatest difference is that none of you were able to enter the city in the end." The Tang Old Master paused, then continued, "And we are about to enter Shualao City." Gao Huan's body became somewhat stiff. The Tang Old Master patted him on the shoulder and said, "Admit defeat," perhaps because he had been shaken by the Tang Old Master's palm. A stream of clear tears flowed down Gao Huan's face. He still maintained his smile, but it was a particularly ugly smile, his young face covered in pain. "If His Majesty were still here, all of you would have died." Gao Huan suddenly raised his voice as he harshly yelled, "No! If he had died earlier, this would not have happened. If that mighty demon lord had died long ago, how could he have been imprisoned in the abyss 700 years ago? He would assuredly have become a legendary figure of the demon race. In the past 1,000 years, how many of the demon race's dazzling geniuses have been cruelly murdered for threatening the old demon lord's position? How many true geniuses have been destroyed in the many purges in Shualao City? Just what sort of damage had those massacres done to the demon race?" There was no answer. The demon lord was already dead. The tears flowed faster and faster, washing his pale face. Gao Huan felt like his heart was in great pain. His left hand tightly gripped the soft armor, blocking his chest, making it harder and harder to breathe. Finally, he slowly collapsed to the ground and stopped breathing. The Tang old master gazed at his corpse in silence for a very long time, recalling many matters of the past. These were truly matters of the past, as it had been almost 1,000 years. On the fallen willow plains, the demon army was like a black tide. One could often see human limbs in the mouths of the giant bloodthirsty wolves. In the months that Luoyang was surrounded, the city gate had only been opened 3 times. The first time was when the demon army demanded that the humans hand over Gaohuan. The gate of Luoyang was open. Sunlight streamed in, elongating the shadow of that genius demon youth. Gaohuan walked out of the city, his steps very steady, his laughter very arrogant. 2 streams of tears flowed down the Tang old master's face. The crowd jumped in fright. The cosmetic-selling girl and the general of the grain convoy rushed over, wanting to persuade him. The Tang old master's tears over Gao Huan's corpse were, in the view of many people, a sign of mutual appreciation between extraordinary individuals. Minister Wei and the blind zither player knew that this was not the case. These were turbid tears. What they needed the most was a cup of celebration, not consolation. "I'm so happy. I'm so happy." The Tang old master wept and yelled, "Quickly go to Shuilao City. I want to be even happier." Chapter 117. The crowd froze for a few moments before realizing that the old master was truly overjoyed, so they hurriedly busied themselves. "Father, please reconsider." The Tang first master was also in the convoy, holding the Tang old master's arm and trying to persuade him. From a military perspective, a convoy of this scale, crossing Mount Noralang and heading to Starry Gorge, was truly rather risky. The Tang old master was rather unhappy at these words, and only after some persuasion did he change his mind. As he looked at the plains and the mountain range, he felt like he could already see Shuilao City several thousand li away, tears streaming down his aged face. "That's right. We've already waited for 1,000 years, so why rush on this day?" The longer one waited, the more impatient one became, but if one truly waited for 1,000 years, then one's patience would always improve. The human armies seemed to be very patient. Whether it was the sudden retreat of the demon army or the inexplicable attack of the hundreds of thousands of tribal warriors, none of them had managed to shake the human front in the slightest. Moreover, they also seemed to have no intention of attacking Shuilao City. When I saw Gao Huan die, I suddenly realized that I would also die, so I had to play it safe. The Tang old master gazed at the distant Shuilao City and said, "I must see the city fall with my own eyes. I will not permit any accidents." Chun Chongsheng replied, "Many people want to see that scene with their own eyes." The Tang old master took the hot tea and nodded at Su Yurong. In the entire world, probably only the Tang old master had the privilege of personally brewing tea for the holy maiden. Su Yurong knew that Chun Chongsheng wanted to say something inconvenient to the Tang old master, so she faintly smiled and left the tent. The tent was extremely quiet, and this silence persisted for a very long time. Eventually, the steam in the cup of hot tea began to evaporate. Tang 36 is not sick, but poisoned. Chun Chongsheng looked into the Tang old master's eyes. His Holiness, the Pope's divine eyes, are like torches. He naturally could not have made a mistake. That poison did not have much of an effect, only made him suffer from a high fever that would not subside. The Tang old master had no intention of concealing anything. He very indifferently admitted the truth, saying the Tang clan needs him alive. He had admitted it because Chun Chongsheng had already guessed at the truth. Since he had not exposed it at the time, it would never be exposed. The Tang old master left the tent and walked toward the small mountain. Su Yurong returned to her tent. She didn't ask that day, and she wouldn't ask today, but Chun Chongsheng felt that he should say something, but he didn't know how to start. Everyone is selfish, especially when he is selfless. Su Yurong used these ambiguous words to conclude the matter. The demons in Shuilao City probably already knew of the fate of Gao Huan's lone army and quickly began to pull back. The wolf cavalry, under the cover of the attendant army, broke away from the human black-armored cavalry and returned to the city. A small portion of the 200,000 tribal warriors were received into the city, while the majority remained outside. The chaotic situation gradually calmed down. The human army didn't chase after them, and the result of this sudden decisive battle could be seen. Standing between the tightly closed city gate and the well-prepared human army, the warriors' eyes were filled with helplessness. The messy tents were filled with despair. The morale of the demon army was already very low, but as the saying goes, a cornered beast will still fight. The human side could wait for a while longer. It was believed that as time passed, the situation would become better, especially for the tribal warriors outside the city. They might even retreat without fighting. For some reason, after Divine General He Ming received a report from Red Falcon, he pondered for the time it took to eat a meal before giving the order to continue the assault. The Central Army was to clean up the tribal warriors that covered the mountains and plains, while the Eastern and Western armies were ordered to draw back as quickly as possible. Many officers and ordinary soldiers did not understand this order, but they carried it out with determination. This was because before issuing this order, Divine General He Ming had gone to Chenchangsheng and Su Yorong's tent and obtained their support. Moreover, Shang Xingzhou on that small mountain had maintained a silence. Every person had their own memories, and hundreds of thousands of people had hundreds of thousands of memories. The memories of the same event might be similar in outline, but there would often be many discrepancies in the details. Guan Feibai had always believed that it was a day in the middle of the 9th month. He had been lying in his tent, receiving treatment from a Li Palace cleric, when he heard the city gate explode several dozen li away. Lifting the curtain, he saw that the leaves of the tree on the slope were so red they seemed to be oozing blood. Bai Kai, on the other hand, insisted that it was a day at the beginning of the 9th month. The wild trees outside Shualao City still had their last green. The reason Guan Feibai had seen those leaves red was because he had killed too many demons and his eyes had gone red. There was no need to worry about these discrepancies in his memories. In short, on a certain day, as autumn thickened, the human army launched its final assault on Shualao City. The final sacred light crossbows fired like a torrential rain at Shualao City. A wolf cavalry unit prepared to leave the city to receive the tribal warriors had the misfortune to run into this volley of arrows, suffering grievous casualties. The catapults moved like giants to the plains in front of Shualao City. The demons in the city seemed to see the ancestral spirit of the Gruel clan, their faces pale. The mountainous rocks mixed with the gunpowder whistled through the air, drawing an extremely high arc as they fell into the city with great difficulty, producing muffled sounds. Even more rocks smashed against the walls of Shualao City. They did not deal any direct damage, but they scattered into a rain of rocks that fell to the ground and battered the heads of the tribal warriors. At the most intense moment of the battle, two demi-human armies suddenly attacked from the northwest. The demi-human North Pacifying Army had been roaming the plains ever since leaving Tsong province, but that had just been a cover. The true reinforcements of the demi-humans had actually taken a detour through the plains of the Elf race, passing through the mountains to the west and under the cover of the Western Army, silently approaching Shualao City. It was all for the sake of delivering a fatal blow to the demons at the crucial moment. Encountering another powerful foe, the demon armies will finally crumbled. More and more tribes began to scatter and flee in all directions. The setting sun dyed the plains red. In order to salvage the situation, the demon commander had taken the risk of infiltrating the human camp in an attempt to kill an important figure like Chun Changsheng to change the course of the battle, or perhaps to temporarily slow down the speed at which the demons were defeated. To the south of the city was a swamp. The wind could not disperse the thick fog, and the red light of the setting sun could not penetrate it. Wangpa had already waited here for the demon commander for many days. When the demon commander used the suicidal charge of several hundred wolf cavalry to sneak into the camp, Wangpa unsheathed his blade. The bright glow of the blade tore through the thick fog above the swamp, illuminating the entire world. Wangpa had not launched a sneak attack. He had done it openly. The demon commander glanced at the camp in front of her, regret in her eyes. The human armies were currently forcing their way into Shualao City. The camp had also been moved several dozen li forward. Chun Changsheng and Su Yurong could already be clearly seen. Ah! The demon commander gave a furious and unwilling howl. The corpses of the human and demon soldiers around her exploded into a rain of blood. Blood flowed on her armor, drenching it with green rust and bright gems, exuding a cruel and crazed aura. She turned around, took out that ridiculously large blade from her back, and raised it to meet the bright blade glow. With a cracking sound, a several-mile-long crack appeared on the field. Underground springs and lava could be vaguely seen in the crack. The demon commander swayed a few times but quickly steadied herself. In everyone's eyes, her short body seemed incomparably large. He raised his long saber and rushed into the swamp. The earth quaked, the cold winds were cut apart, and the thick fog was cut apart. The world's two strongest blades clashed once more. Terrifying blade intent stirred the fog, and like a tornado, it was quickly swept clean. The hundreds of thousands of people on the plains could clearly see what was happening in the swamp. The black swamp was incomparably soft and wet, and it was impossible to see two figures moving at such high speeds. Two blade glows would occasionally illuminate the world and send the black mud flying into the sky. Gradually, many truths that had been concealed by the swamp for countless years began to emerge. There were piles of white bones, treasure chests filled with gold coins, and many secret rooms. These histories that might have been forgotten, that might have become stories in books, were cleaved to pieces by these two powerful blades. In the face of absolute power, everything would become meaningless. With a massive boom, Wang Po's blade collided with the demon commander's large blade. All the water in the swamp was sent flying into the air, transforming into a muddy rain. The soft black mud was also sent flying, falling in a radius of several dozen li. Whether it was the demon soldiers or the human soldiers, they were all drenched from head to toe and smelled foul. A fissure 10-some li long appeared on the plains. Wang Po stood at the end of the fissure, half his body buried in the ground. His face was pale, and two streams of blood flowed from the corners of his lips. The hand gripping the blade trembled, adding another nick to the blade. The demon commander was not much better off. She drew a straight white line in the air as she crashed into the gate of Shiwalao City. All the demon soldiers on the walls heard the boom and felt the tremors from within the walls. The demon commander vomited blood. Her blood slightly cleared, and just when she was about to fly back to the wall, a shadow suddenly fell on her face. This shadow came from a massive kite. In the light of the setting sun, the kite seemed to be burning. It matched the scenery in the painting hanging under the kite very well. Besides the painting of Sangarama temple burning, there was also a person tied to the kite. The wind rustled the white paper. Xiao Zhang leaped toward the gate, the frost god spear in his hand as he squeaked. To be continued. Chapter 118. Some time ago, Xiao Zhang had suffered two very serious injuries, and his ambush on Black Robe in the carriage had only worsened his injuries. It had also been very difficult for him to ride a kite to chase after the demon commander. But his resolve and determination to strike with his spear were not forced. It was imbued with an aura of no return and an extremely cold and ruthless energy. With a thump, a bloody hole appeared in the demon commander's armor, the bright jewels shattering into shards of ice. With a furious howl, the demon commander flipped his right hand, and a crescent blade slammed into Xiao Zhang's shoulder. Xiao Zhang landed on the ground, the white paper on his face drenched in blood. Arrogant and proud laughter came from below. He felt like all the bones in his body were about to shatter. It was painful, but it was also exhilarating. He was confident that no matter how powerful the demon commander was, she would not be able to fight for some time. More importantly, he had fulfilled his promise to Shang Xingzhou. He had sent this painting to Shiwalao City. The wolf cavalry of the plains charged at Xiao Zhang, the second demon general's figure clearly visible among them. Just when everyone believed that Xiao Zhang was about to die, two dazzling sword glows lit up at the same time and then fused together, transforming into a beautiful rainbow. The kite crashed into the city gate, and the painting of Sangarama Temple on fire also drifted down to the gate. Illuminated by the setting sun, it suddenly began to blaze. Flames flowed down the city gate like a waterfall, a spectacular sight to behold. The rainbow formed by the sword glows forced back the second demon general and the wolf cavalry, at the same time making the waterfall of fire even fiercer. This fire burned for a very long time, with tinsome explosions occurring in between. No matter what the demon soldiers did, they could not put out the fire. From dusk into the night, the city gate of Shualao City continued to burn, looking like a massive wall of fire. On this night, many living beings found it impossible to sleep. The fleeing demon soldiers and the pursuing human cavalry naturally could not sleep, and neither could anyone inside or outside Shualao City. The Tang Old Master and Shang Xingzhou stood on a small hill, calmly gazing at the distant wall of fire for an entire night, as if it was the most beautiful sight in the world. Perhaps they were thinking of the siege of Luoyang, of the Sangarama Temple that had been burned to ashes, or perhaps they were thinking of nothing at all. In the early morning, the fire was finally extinguished. The city gate had been burned to the point where only its frame was left, and one could vaguely see its outline. Most of it had been reduced to ashes, and it could no longer block the enemy. No one knew what secrets the painting of Sangarama Temple was hiding or why it would burn so fiercely. They could only guess that it had something to do with the Tang family. The entire strategy for this battle had probably been devised by Shang Xingzhou, or perhaps even Wang Jitze. If you wanted to do something and thought about it for a few hundred years, then the method you came up with would definitely be very terrifying. This was also the reason why Chang Sheng had come to such a conclusion when he saw the empty street and the dog in Wenshui City. Old people are really scary. The greatest obstacle to entering Shualao City had disappeared, but on the morning of the next day, the human armies did not take advantage of the situation to attack the city. Instead, they mobilized all their catapults and ballistae and aimed them at the vanished city gate. From time to time, they fired ballista bolts and catapults to prevent the demon defenders from repairing the gate. The human armies had also suffered grievous casualties. Xiao Zhang was still unconscious, and even Qin Changsheng and Su Yurong were injured. They would not be able to fight at full strength for the time being and needed some time to recover. Moreover, the two demi-human reinforcements that had come from afar truly did need to catch their breath. In the central army camp, Chun Changsheng received the commanding generals of the demi-human reinforcements and realized that they were all familiar people. The commanding general of the first demi-human army was the Shi clan leader, while Xiaoda was the primary fighting force. The commanding general of the other demi-human army was the Bear tribe leader, but Qin Changsheng found it rather strange that he did not see Xianyuan Pe. On the afternoon of the same day, an even more detailed report was sent into the tent. After reading through it, Archbishop and Lin fell silent, then said the Brown Bear tribe will be exterminated. In order to distinguish themselves from the Bear tribe of the Red River Valley, the Bear tribe of the Snowy Plains was often called the Brown Bear tribe. Whether it was because they had too many mixed bloods or because they were constantly trading, many spies had appeared among the Brown Bear tribe. Many years ago, when Chun Changsheng returned to the south with Su Li and when Xiao Zhang returned, they had both been sold out by spies from the Brown Bear tribe. Both the Great Zhou dynasty and White Emperor City hated the Brown Bear tribe to the bone. If not for the fact that they needed to use the Brown Bear tribe to understand the movements of the demons, they would have long ago attacked them. Now that the outcome of the war had been decided, the Brown Bear tribe naturally would not meet a good end. Qin Changsheng understood that Archbishop and Lin could not bear to see this and wanted him to issue an amnesty. But after some thought, he said nothing. Because of his silence, Archbishop and Lin sighed, then said, "The Wolf tribe leader and elders wish to pay their respects to Sir, but their rank is not high enough." In this war, the demi-human army that had performed the most outstandingly and accomplished the most was not the brave and powerful landowning households, nor was it the violent and warlike Bear tribe. Rather, it was the Wolf tribe that had always kept a low profile and rarely put their lives on the line on the battlefield. This was especially the case half a month ago, when the wolf tribe was responsible for ambushing the demon reinforcements from Lelong County. They ended up encountering 1,000 wolf cavalry. The battle was extremely bitter, and if the wolf tribe had not risked their lives and paid a grievous price to completely exterminate the wolf cavalry, they would have broken out of the encirclement, causing the demons to be wary of the demi-human reinforcements. Although Chan Changsheng had given a portion of the elf grasslands to the wolf tribe at Zheshio's request, every time he thought about how Zheshio had been driven out of the tribe by his elders as a child and had to wander through the snowstorm, he would always feel some anger towards the wolf tribe, especially those members of the upper echelon. Today, for the sake of the wolf tribe's military achievements, he agreed to meet with the wolf tribe leader and elders, but he was not prepared to give them too much time. The wolf clan's patriarch, an elder, walked into the tent and knelt down without saying a word, appearing extremely pious. When they raised their heads, Chun Chong Sheng froze, not only because of the sincerity in their eyes, but also because they were very young. How could the wolf tribe leader, an elder, be so young? And where did that heartfelt affection and respect come from? Was it because they knew that the grasslands the wolf tribe currently possessed were bestowed upon them by Chun Changsheng? Qin Changsheng took measure of the tribe leader and elder. Seeing their attire, he suddenly understood the answer to these questions. The weather of early autumn in Shualao City was already rather cold. The wolf tribe leader and elder were still wearing very thin clothes, especially their sleeves and trousers, which had been cut down to a very short length. Many years ago, when Chun Chang Shang saw Zheshio for the first time under the morning sun outside the Li Palace, he had been like this. Only now did he understand what sort of influence Zheshio had on the wolf tribe. The current wolf tribe probably had countless Zheshios, so it was no wonder they were so powerful. With how young the wolf tribe leader and elder were, they could naturally understand. They were both Zheshio's followers. Their successful ascension represented countless battles and cruel purges. In this process, countless elders of the wolf tribe had died or been forced to relinquish their authority. But where was Zheshio now? Good news was coming from everywhere. Whether it was the demi-human reinforcements, the two border armies approaching the south of Shualao City, or the third wave of cavalry that had just arrived from the south, they were all gaining victory after victory. Demon cities were being broken one after another, and many tribes had already sent people to contact the human armies to ask how they could surrender. Shualao City was isolated and without help. The human armies had gathered at the foot of the city and were preparing to attack, but they did not encircle it. They paid no attention to the several gates to the north, as the humans did not have that many soldiers. At the same time, they hoped to use this opportunity to lower the demons' will to fight. According to the reports of the scouts, not many demons had escaped from the northern gate, and there were no groups of soldiers. It seemed like the demons were preparing to fight their final battle in Shualao City. No one was willing to see this sight, but no one was worried, because everyone was keenly aware that the human race was certain to win. The destruction of a dynasty was right in front of them, and the end of a period of history was not far away. The demon race had once ruled this world. In the eyes of other races, they were like gods, forever high and mighty, possessing unimaginable wisdom and civilization. But now, they were gradually falling into the dust, until they fell into the abyss, never to climb out of the ground again. Let alone the demons themselves, even their enemies, the humans and demi-humans, were confused as to why this was happening. They felt a faint sense of disappointment and frustration. Countless years of accumulation, extremely deep resources, and such a developed civilization. Was it really going to come to such a sudden end? It was just like the gate of Shualao City. It seemed like it would not collapse for tens of thousands of years, but in the end, it had been reduced to smoke by a single fire. It's always being battered by the wind and rain. Su Yurong stood on the slope, a white cloth tied around her wounded left shoulder. Her face was rather haggard, but her expression was very calm. There are many examples of civilization being defeated by barbarism, but we are the true civilization. The demons' problem lies with themselves. They are no longer suited to this era, so there is no medicine to save them. Whether it was in terms of innate intelligence or acquired treatment, there was an enormous gap between the high-level demons and the low-level demons. But it just so happened that the demon seeds of the low-level demons played an indispensable role in the reproduction of their race. This sense of division and the fact that they could not be separated assuredly caused demon society to grow more and more deformed. Many years ago, Grand Scholar Tungus had realized this problem. After a long period of thought, he placed his hopes on the humans. In his view, the humans and the high-level demons were similar in appearance, and more importantly, they had similar levels of intelligence. It was precisely based on this idea that he and the Pope worked together to carry out a series of tasks, ultimately creating a new life like the 8 great mountain men. Alas, his idea ultimately failed to be realized. Qin Changsheng understood her meaning, but he still felt somewhat sorrowful. At this moment, many people in the surrounding camps raised their heads to the sky. The cries of geese could be heard as streaks of lines appeared. More than 10 red geese and red falcons flew over from the south. Just what major event had occurred for so many red geese and red falcons to be mobilized? Everyone had solemn and nervous expressions. The red geese and red falcons brought shocking news. The Prince of Xiang had betrayed them. To be continued. Chapter 119. The Prince of Xiang had not defected to Xiulao City. Even if he wanted to, none of his subordinates would follow him. Therefore, to be precise, he was not a traitor, but a rebel, taking the 20,000 soldiers that were preparing for war at Yongshua Pass. He came to Jingdo and asked the emperor to abdicate. Because of this news, the camp became very chaotic. Many mounts appeared on the plains, and many gazes fell on a certain tent of the Western Army. Wasn't the Prince of Xiang heavily injured and recuperating? How could he suddenly appear in the capital tens of thousands of li away? Other than the cavalry commander monitoring Xiulao City, on the evening of the same day, all the commanders of the human army, the important figures of the orthodoxy, and the representatives of the cultivation sects gathered in the central tent. Divine General He Ming stood in front of the sand table, his face flickering with uncertainty. Chun Changsheng and Su Yurong sat at the back and didn't say anything. The tent was unusually quiet, and the atmosphere became more and more oppressive until a sound came from outside. A middle-aged man in disheveled clothes was escorted in. It was the Prince of Xiang. Everyone was shocked. Upon closer inspection, they realized that this person's appearance, build, and demeanor were extremely similar to the Prince of Xiang, but this was only a substitute. The Prince of Xiang was an expert of the divine domain. Beneath his comically plump appearance was a hidden aura of an expert, but this substitute did not. Liar! A hateful curse could be heard coming from somewhere. From a moment they confirmed that the Prince of Xiang was a substitute. They confirmed that the news of the Southern Rebellion was true. Only now did many people recall that in the battle to the north of the Starry Gorge a few days ago, the Prince of Zhongshan had bravely fought and was unfortunately heavily injured, being sent back to the south. The people in the tent looked at each other, wanting to determine who besides the Prince of Xiang and the Prince of Zhongshan had left and who had stayed behind. 3 princes of the Chun clan were in the tent, their faces rather pale. They were not worried that they were suspicious, but were certain that they had been abandoned by the Prince of Xiang. Peng Shihai and the others had particularly nasty complexions. They had a close relationship with the Prince of Xiang, even close. Who could have expected that the Prince of Xiang would be able to hide this from even them? He was leading his soldiers in a bloody battle on the front lines while the Prince of Xiang and his people were leading rebel soldiers and preparing to attack the capital. How could he not be angry at this contrast? What do they want to do? Do you think it's that easy to change dynasties? Daoist Siyuan's gaze was deep and serene. He looked at Peng Shihai like a ghost. Peng Shihai snorted coldly. He wanted to say something, but in the end, he didn't say anything. Why is there no letter from Xiunyang City? Someone suddenly thought of a problem. Xiunyang City was the main camp of the demons on this northern expedition. From the armaments, provisions, and soldiers, everything began here. Its position was extremely important, and after much consideration before the war, It was ultimately decided that the divine domain expert Chao Yunping, who was trusted by all sides, would personally oversee it. For the Prince of Xiang to fake his injuries and secretly return to Snowhold Pass to organize the rebel army was not too difficult. But if the rebel army wanted to reach the capital, they had to pass through Xuanyang City. With Chao Yunping's strength and the garrison of Xuanyang City, even if they could not exterminate the rebel army, they could at least delay them for a very long time. There was no way they wouldn't even have enough time to send out a warning. The rebellion had probably occurred some time ago. Xuanyang City's silence could only mean that there was an extremely bad possibility. Someone personally saw Chao Yunping and the Prince of Xiang together. Divine General He Ming continued to look at the sand table and casually said, "Just outside the capital." Hearing this, the tent fell silent again. All the armies of the Great Zhou dynasty were in front of Xuelao City, as were all their experts. Now that Chao Yunping had thrown his lot in with the Prince of Xiang, no one could stop the rebel army. The capital had no walls. If they wanted to exterminate the rebellion and save the emperor, then retreat was their only choice. But Xuelao City was right in front of them, the city gate broken and the demons on the verge of extinction. If the human armies retreated, the demons would have a chance to catch their breath. Who knew how history would develop? Who would dare to take on this responsibility? It had to be said that the Prince of Xiang had chosen the perfect time to launch his rebellion. Or perhaps it was too bad. He wants to become a sinner for all of history. The sound of wheels grinding over gravel came from outside the tent, accompanied by an elderly voice. The Tang old master walked into the tent and looked at the Prince of Xiang's substitute. His eyes were very indifferent, like he was looking at a dead man. Everyone knew that no matter what the outcome of this matter was, this person would never survive. The Prince of Xiang's substitute got up from the ground, tidied his clothes, and smiled at the Tang old master. "Your Highness is wrong." He had naturally prepared himself for death, but for him to remain so calm, one had to admit that he was rather dashing. His Highness is naturally not willing for his own matters to affect the foundation of the human race. The Prince of Xiang's substitute looked around and said, "He entrusted me to tell all of you that before all of you enter Xuelao City and burn down the demon palace, the army will not take a single step into the capital." Peng Shihai harshly said, "Then what if we immediately return south? Is he going to do something disgraceful and heinous? Is he going to threaten us with this?" The Prince of Xiang's substitute sternly said, "Wrong again. His Highness has said that if all of you choose to return south, he will allow himself to be captured, but he will look down on all of you." A few dry laughs came from the tent, but they quickly stopped. This was not the time to laugh, and there was a chill in these words. Does His Highness really believe that he will succeed? Divine General He Ming raised his head and stared into the substitute's eyes. "Do you also believe that he will succeed?" The substitute faintly smiled. "At the start, I also thought that these were the ravings of a madman, but His Highness convinced me." All the strength of the Great Zhou dynasty was currently gathered in Xuelao City. If the Prince of Xiang's goal was only to break into the capital, occupy the imperial palace, and force the emperor to abdicate, then it truly would be very easy for him to succeed. The problem was, how many people would he be able to obtain after this? Chen Changsheng would assuredly lead the orthodoxy in a counterattack, and he would have the support of the cultivation sects represented by Holy Maiden Peak and the Mountly Sword sect, as well as the noble clans represented by the Tang clan. Even if the Prince of Xiang temporarily did not need to worry about his teacher-student relationship with the future empress of the demi-humans, this was still very difficult to resist. So why did the Prince of Xiang dare to start this rebellion? Only if he was confident that Qin Changsheng, the Li Palace, and those other factions would not affect him in any way. Just where did his confidence come from? No matter how one looked at it, the first condition was for Shang Xingzhou to declare his position and stand on his side. Many gazes fell on the small carriage outside the tent. The Prince of Xiang's substitute smiled. "His Highness, please be at ease. He will definitely place the world above all else and will not act recklessly." It seemed like the Prince of Xiang truly had placed his hopes on Shang Xingzhou. Truly, Only Shang Xingzhou could intimidate Chen Changsheng after the matter was over, whether it was through his status as a teacher or his seniority in the orthodoxy. And the entire continent knew that Shang Xingzhou did not like Chen Changsheng. As long as the human race could unite the world, as long as Taizong's descendant remained on the throne, it did not seem important who became emperor. Yuan was dead, so the Prince of Xiang was unquestionably the most suitable candidate for the new monarch. But the entire continent knew that Shang Xingzhou liked Yuan. Why would the Prince of Xiang bet on Shang Xingzhou's support? The tent became extremely quiet. Everyone stared at the small carriage, waiting for Shang Xingzhou to make his decision. The Tang old master suddenly left the tent because he knew what Shang Xingzhou would do. If it were him, he would also make the same choice. The young Taoist boy lifted the curtain and jumped down from the carriage. He looked at the generals and experts in the tent and said in a young and uncertain voice, "Ancestor said that the city is about to fall. Those unimportant minor matters can be discussed later." Several gasps could be heard in the silent tent. Everyone was stunned. His most beloved student was about to die in shameless rebellion, but he was so indifferent. In the eyes of the venerable Taoist, the extermination of the demon race was truly more important than anything else. Respect was one thing, obedience was another. Not everyone would listen to Shang Xingzhou's opinion. Many generals turned to Divine General He Ming. Divine General He Ming was a commanding general personally appointed by the emperor. So many people had guesses as to how he would choose. His Majesty personally said that when a general is outside, the sovereign's orders may not be obeyed. He will not blindly give orders. Divine General He Ming added, and the capital has not sent an imperial decree. The tent fell into an uproar. No one had expected this sort of attitude from him. The corners of Shui, his forehead slightly bulged, clearly furious to the extreme. Linghai Zhuang's face was even gloomier, his hands trembling in his sleeves. He was already prepared to strike. Someone turned to a certain corner. Wang Pe had been quietly standing there the entire time, the Wu clan head and the elders of Mount Li's sword hall standing nearby. They had maintained their silence this entire time, not even glancing at Chen Changsheng. But everyone knew that they would stand with Chen Changsheng, perhaps with Su Yurong. Chen Changsheng did not look at Su Yurong, but at the young Taoist boy next to the carriage. He seemed to be thinking about something, and his mind seemed to be wandering. Someone coughed. He came to his senses and said, "That's it then. To be continued." Chapter 120. So be it. Regardless of whether the music ends and the people disperse in the end, he had to do what was in front of him first. Just as Shang Xingzhou had said, Shuilao City was right before their eyes. As he got closer and closer to Shuilao City, the distance between Chen Changsheng and the small carriage also decreased. Now there was only 10-some li between them, allowing him to clearly see the other party. It was still a small hill. There was a withered tree on the hillside, and a few jackdaws perched on it. Their eyes were not red, so they probably had not eaten human flesh before. The small cart stopped under the tree. The little Taoist was squatting on the ground, digging something. Chen Changsheng suddenly said, "I think the white crane lied to you." Su Yurong crossed her arms and draped an unlined garment over her shoulders. She turned her head and asked, "What did you lie to me about?" Chen Changsheng hesitated for a while and said, "I wasn't that good-looking when I was young." Su Yurong smiled faintly and said, "Jealous?" Chen Changsheng looked at the small hill in the distance and softly agreed. Su Yurong said, "Only your senior brother and that person remember what you looked like when you were young. If there's a chance, you can ask them." Who would have thought that the opportunity would come so quickly? In the evening of the same day, Shang Xingzhou sent a message asking Chen Changsheng to come over. The master and disciple ate a few papayas personally roasted by the young Taoist. This could be considered as their last dinner, and then they began to talk. At the beginning of this conversation, they did not speak of the nearby Shuilao City, nor did they speak of the urgent matter of the capital, much less reminisce about the life in Xining Village's old temple. The style of this conversation was very similar to Shang Xingzhou's attitude towards the world, but it also had a hint of Chen Changsheng's way of the sword, with an extremely deep disdain hidden behind the directness. The White Emperor once said that no one on this continent would trust me. This is where I'm inferior to you. Shang Xingzhou said, but that's because you're very young and have endless possibilities, but I'm already old. There seemed to be no logical connection between the two sentences. Chen Chang, Shang listened quietly. When the greatest fear of death is placed in front of us, it's hard for anyone to escape. Shang Xingzhou continued. In this aspect, I'm far inferior to you. I'm very anxious. So over the years, I've been too hasty in some things. Chen Chang Shang confirmed that he understood. So behind the disdain, there was something else hidden. This could be considered an explanation or even an apology. In any case, it was something Shang Xingzhou would never say directly. That was how old people were. Chen Changsheng suddenly felt a little sad and didn't want to continue this topic. I think there's something wrong with this. Shang Xingzhou was not worried at all about the rebellion in the capital, nor was Chen Changsheng. What he truly needed to worry about was Xiulao City. The demons had been defeated too quickly. Not only did the master and disciple have this kind of opinion, but the entire court also had this kind of feeling. In the original plan, the human race had already prepared to fight for 3 years, or even longer. But now, it had been settled in less than half a year. This made Chen Changsheng feel a little uneasy. Black Robe might want to do something, but she will never succeed. Those who are used to mysticism do not understand what true strategy is. In the end, they will only die in the rat's nest of mysticism. 300 years ago, if not for Wang Jitsa getting in the way, your martial uncle and I would have already killed her. This person is not worth mentioning. Shang Xingzhou made a very harsh evaluation of the demon military advisor who had a great reputation. It was not only because he had the qualifications to evaluate the advisor in terms of strategy and mysteriousness, but also because he and Black Robe had fought and worked together for several centuries, so they were very familiar with each other. He took out a porcelain bottle and gave it to Chen Changsheng. This medicine is not as effective as the cinnabar pill, but it's very simple to make. The main ingredient is the ancestral spirit fire from beneath White Emperor City. Chen Changsheng froze at these words. He opened the bottle and took a sniff, then asked uncertainly, the golden thread from the monastery of Eternal Spring? Shang Xingzhou replied, correct. Confused, Chen Changsheng said, back then, I truly did think about using this medicine to control its strength, but Shang Xingzhou said, your medical skills were taught by me. Do you think you can surpass me? Chen Changsheng was speechless, but he quickly became happy. No wonder the army had so few casualties this time. Shang Xingzhou said, in the future, don't refine the cinnabar pill. It's not like you're a woman, so what's the point of bleeding every month? Chen Changsheng was once more speechless. His mouth slightly opened, but he didn't know what to say. For some reason, Shang Xingzhou felt a little angry at his appearance. There's nothing else. Let's go. He was still so stern, and at times extremely cold. Chen Changsheng suddenly thought of his childhood in Xining Village's old temple. His master's attitude toward him had always wavered between cold and stern, just like today's conversation. Sternness was much better than indifference. Shang Xingzhou had been cold to the young Chen Changsheng precisely because he was afraid that Chen Changsheng would fall in love with the little Taoist he had raised. Because he knew that he was using Chen Changsheng. Later on, he loathed Chen Changsheng precisely because he loathed that part of him that was related to Chen Changsheng. Both master and disciple knew this. They had spoken of it in the Orthodox Academy and in the Mausoleum of Books, so there was no need to speak of it now. The current Shang Xingzhou was probably very happy because he no longer had to worry about falling in love with the little Taoist he had raised. As he gazed outside the carriage at the soot-blackened face of the little Taoist, Chen Changsheng thought to himself, you're also happy. Before leaving, he finally couldn't help but ask that question. Master, was I not pretty when I was a child? Shang Xingzhou thought it over, then replied, not bad. Your 2 students have treated you rather well. After Chen Changsheng left the hill, the Tang Old Master returned from the back of the mountain. In the days that he had been on the front lines, the Tang Old Master had not spent time with the people of the Tang clan. Instead, he spent every day with Shang Xingzhou. Shang Xingzhou said, "It's not like you don't know how those two little thieves forced me 10 years ago." The Tang old master sighed, "But they're still much more filial than my own grandson. That little brute almost tore down his own ancestral hall." Shang Xingzhou glanced at him and asked, "Just what do you want to say?" The Tang old master seriously asked, "Are you still well?" Shang Xingzhou fell quiet for a while, then replied, "Not very well." The Tang old master gazed at Shualao City under the starlight and said, "It's already come to this. You have to wait a little longer." Shang Xingzhou replied, "Those people that I personally sent away didn't see it, so I naturally have to see it myself." The human armies did not retreat south, but continued to prepare for the final assault. The western and eastern armies fanned out to clear out the strongholds and strongholds outside the city, but the news of the rebellion could not be completely suppressed. It quickly spread, causing the mood in the camps to grow more and more tense. Perhaps the demon lord in Shualao City had learned of the internal strife of the human race, and he had organized several wolf cavalry to launch a counterattack, but they were all resolutely beaten back by the human armies. Strangely, the upper echelons of the demon race still had no intention of abandoning Shualao City, and no one knew what they were thinking. One morning, at 5 o'clock, Qin Changxing opened his eyes and woke up. He used 5 breaths of time to calm his mind, then got out of bed. With Hua's help, he put on his shoes and clothes, washed his face and rinsed his mouth, and then walked out of the tent. He circled the hill where the central army tent was, and then he stared blankly at Shualao City, shrouded in mist. After defying the heavens and changing his fate in the mausoleum of books, his life was still simple and healthy, but he was no longer as rigidly disciplined and almost painstakingly cultivated as he had in the past 10-some years. In truth, it had been a very long time since he had gotten up so early. At 6 o'clock, Su Yurong woke up, and the two ate breakfast together. After eating 2 bowls of wheat porridge, Su Yurong decided to sleep a little longer. Qin Changshang felt very free, so he decided to take a stroll. The morning sun gradually rose, and the mist dispersed. He felt a slight vibration on his wrist, and then Luolua's voice came from within. Qin Changshang glanced at the gradually clearer Shualao City, then went to that small hill 10-some li away. He stood in front of the carriage and said, "The time has come." Shang Xingzhou was quiet for a while, then said, "Enter the city." Chapter 121. The army of hundreds of thousands of humans advanced toward Shualao City. They walked in silence, not making much noise, but there was no other atmosphere, only tranquility. This did not seem like the march of the victors, but more like a wanderer returning home. It truly was a rather strange sight. The honor of being the first to enter Shualao City had been bestowed upon Guan Fei Bai. The Mountly Sword sect had played an extremely important role in this war, achieving countless achievements, but it had also suffered many casualties among its disciples. Of course, this was also very dangerous. There might be an ambush at the city gate, some red-eyed wolf cavalry. Guan Fei Bai raised his sword and walked toward the city gate. The city gate that had been destroyed by the fire of Sangarama Temple now only had its frame left, and it had been continuously damaged by the catapults over the last few days. Guan Fei Bai walked in. Everything was so casual. There were no sneak attacks, no ambushes, no battles. He stood in the empty city gate, slightly tilting his head as if he was also rather surprised. Then he turned around and waved his hand at the plains behind him. Cheers rose up and soared into the heavens. With a thunderous thundering of hooves, the cavalry entered the city. Under the protection of the red falcons, the flying carriage slowly ascended the city walls. The moment they entered Shualao City, many people, including Qin Changsheng, couldn't help but turn their heads to the south. What was happening to the capital? I've never seen such a shameless person. The Prince of Luling stared at the distant square-faced man, exuding an aura of dignity, and resentfully said, "Even his own nephew wants to rebel." This was going on in his head. The Prince of Cheng followed his gaze and realized that it was Tianhai Chenwu. He bitterly smiled and said, "That old fox is more shrewd than anyone else. He won't stand on the wrong side." No one had expected that the Tianhai clan, which had been cautious and low-key for 10-some years, would be the first to respond to the Prince of Xiang's rebellion. Many people were just as confused as the Prince of Luling. It had to be known that the blood of the Tianhai clan flowed in the emperor's body. The Prince of Cheng saw the Prince of Luling's expression and realized that he still did not understand. He could only patiently explain, "Last year, His Majesty went to the 100-herb garden 3 times. The Prince of Luling froze, then asked, "So what?" Prince Cheng lowered his voice and said, "There's always been a rumor that His Holiness the Pope buried the divine Empress's body in the 100-herb garden." The Prince of Luling finally understood. Sucking in a breath of cold air, he said, "Could it be that His Majesty really intends to reverse the verdict?" County Prince Cheng shook his head and said, "Your Majesty and Dao Master have a deep relationship. It shouldn't be like this. But in the end, he and the Empress are mother and son. If he goes to the 100-herb garden to pay his respects, no one will be able to say anything. I'm just worried that his feelings for the Empress will grow deeper and deeper. That'll be troublesome." The Tianhai Divine Empress had died 10-some years ago. Before this, Yuren did not have many memories of her, and logically speaking, he should not have had much affection for her. However, feelings were the most wonderful thing in the first place. Just a few words from a bystander, and some scenes could make it flood again. His Majesty developing feelings for the Divine Empress was a very natural matter. No one would worry, except for the Tianhai clan. When the entire world rebelled against Tianhai, the emperor could not hate Shang Xingzhou, could not hate the princes of the Qin clan, could not hate those ministers of the court, but he could hate the Tianhai clan and Su Shiji. That old fox Tianhai Qinwu could clearly see that the deeper His Majesty felt for the Divine Empress, the more he would hate the Tianhai clan, because they were traitors. If Su Shiji could still barely survive in the court because of Su Yorong, what would happen to the Tianhai clan when the time came? On the Luo River in early autumn, the 2 banks were lined with green trees, the sky high and the air cool. The armies returning from the north, the princes of the Qin clan, and the experts raised by the Tianhai clan stood on the banks of the river in 2 dense rows. If several thousand ballista bolts were fired in unison, this rebellion might end in a comical and bloody fashion. But let alone the capital, even if all the provinces and counties were added together, they still would not be able to muster so many ballista bolts. It was precisely because of this that the rebel army was so unorganized, that the princes and the rebel generals were still in the mood to chat. The rebel army did not surround the city, because the capital had no walls, so it was simply impossible to surround it. In the silent wait of the last few days, the vast majority of the common people had already fled. The capital was probably very deserted, with not a single person to be seen on the streets. This did not seem like a rebellion at all, but more like an outing. The rebel army seemed very relaxed, but from certain details, one could still see that they were very nervous. Those untimely chats had always been evidence of their nervousness. If the Prince of Xiang did not win his gamble, they would all die without a grave. At this moment, a red goose flew over. The news from the front lines had been sent back to the capital. The human army had finally broken into Xiulao City. Cheers rose from the 2 banks of the Luo River. Whether it was the princes or the rebel soldiers, all of them revealed sincere smiles, which quickly turned into awkwardness. It now appeared that they no longer needed to worry about becoming the greatest sinner in history and bearing eternal infamy. But why did they feel that their faces were even more unsightly? "Your Highness, do you really not care about becoming infamous for 10,000 years?" In the carriage at the very front of the rebel army, Chao Yunping rubbed his round cheeks and smiled at the Prince of Xiang. After stealthily returning from the front lines, the Prince of Xiang had stayed in Snowhold Pass for a while. He had already recovered from his 2 previous injuries, but he was clearly much thinner than before. "And you?" The Prince of Xiang indifferently glanced at Chao Yunping and said, "If the Elder of Heavenly Secrets were still alive, he would probably tear you apart." Chao Yunping chuckled. "I don't care about eternal infamy, because I'm a fool." The Prince of Xiang smiled. "That's reasonable. Then I'm a madman." After a while, his smile faded. As he gazed at the imperial palace in the distance, he sighed and leisurely said, "In truth, it's just that I'm not willing." He had always believed that of Emperor Xian's sons, he was the most outstanding, and his filial piety to the divine empress was commendable. In every aspect, he should have been emperor, and he had an even more outstanding son. If he did not seize this chance, once the demons were exterminated and the humans unified the continent, Yuren would obtain unprecedented prestige, and he would lose all hope. It was just that simple. Chao Yunping ruefully said, "I don't know if we can win this gamble." The Prince of Xiang rubbed the fat on his belt and said, "His Majesty wants to reverse Imperial Mother's verdict. How can the venerable Taoist tolerate him?" Chao Yunping shook his head. "In the end, it's something that hasn't happened. So how can it be hidden from the venerable Taoist?" The Prince of Xiang replied, "Even so, the venerable Taoist might not support His Majesty. In truth, many people have never thought that his attitude towards His Majesty is actually a reflection of his attitude towards Emperor Taizong. To put another way, he likes His Majesty because he likes Emperor Taizong's benevolent, wise side of Emperor Taizong. So why can't he like me?" Chao Yunping pointed at the Prince of Xiang's round belly and said, "Could it be that you also have Emperor Taizong's good points?" The Prince of Xiang sternly replied, "Of course, isn't my daring and extremely shameless behavior just another side of Emperor Taizong?" Chao Yunping clutched his belly and laughed, but it didn't take long for his laughter to stop. He looked at the Prince of Xiang and very seriously said, "I suddenly feel that your words are very reasonable." The rebel army encountered no resistance when they entered the capital, and the deserted streets truly were devoid of pedestrians. Only the occasional stray cat would warily raise its head from a pile of trash. The capital's garrison was very small, numbering around 3,000 imperial guards and orthodoxy cavalry. They had long ago retreated to the imperial palace and the Li Palace. The soldiers participating in the rebellion were naturally extremely loyal to the Prince of Xiang, but their numbers were not very high. 13,000 cavalry did not have much of an advantage over the imperial guards and orthodoxy cavalry, who had the geographical advantage, much less control over the entire capital. The rebel army's true chance of victory rested on the Prince of Xiang and Chao Yunping, two experts of the divine domain. The majestic imperial city was right in front of them, and the ginkgo trees that had begun to shed their leaves were extremely conspicuous on the flat ground of New North Bridge. The Prince of Xiang and Chao Yunping stood amidst the yellow leaves, gazing at the imperial palace, paying no attention to the mighty divine crossbows on the walls. Sensing the powerful qi in the imperial palace, Chao Yunping slightly creased his brow and asked, "This is the imperial design?" The Prince of Xiang also creased his brow. "The Lingyan Pavilion has been destroyed, and I'm sure that the White Sun Flame was sent to Xiulao City, so this should only be a part of the imperial design." Chao Yunping squinted his eyes, which were like two slits on a large steamed bun. "This is rather troublesome." At this moment, another very troublesome piece of news came from the rebel army. The Prince of Xiang's complexion turned rather nasty, but Chao Yunping began to laugh. To be continued. Chapter 122. Just like the other streets, the road of peace was deserted. The experts of the Tianhai clan and those princely estates had long since left the city to rendezvous with the rebel army and were now outside the imperial palace. At this time, the Prince of Zhongshan left the rebel army and returned to his estate on the road of peace. The Prince of Xiang and the Prince of Zhongshan had the highest prestige among the princes of the Qin clan. His departure was a very shocking matter to the rebel army, and it might even shake their morale. Qin Shi was the chief strategist of the manor. He did not follow the army north. Instead, he secretly remained in Jingdo, acting as liaison and support. After receiving the news, he quickly returned to the prince's mansion. When he saw the prince sitting in the armchair, it was as if he had seen a ghost. The Prince of Zhongshan had been recuperating at Blue Pass this entire time. Today, he had arrived at the capital and met with the Prince of Xiang in the rebel army. After speaking for a while, he had returned to his personal camp. No one had expected that he would return to the capital himself. After returning to his estate, he took a bath, slept, and changed into a thin and soft silk robe. At this moment, he was holding a bowl of fried paste noodles and slurping it down. "My good prince, what are you doing? Do you know that we are plotting a rebellion? Is this a rebellion?" Qin Shi said with a face full of absurdity. "You can either follow them or quickly make up your mind. How can you just go home and sleep? Is this bowl of noodles that delicious?" The Prince of Zhongshan put down his bowl and expressionlessly said, "Annoying. Just tell me what you want." Qin Shi's eyes turned as he whispered, "From a situation outside the imperial city, the Prince of Xiang seems very confident." The Prince of Zhongshan sneered. "You think that Brother Wang will let me be emperor?" Qin Shi was slightly startled and said, "I think it shouldn't be." The Prince of Zhongshan replied, "This being the case, what difference does it make to me whether he succeeds or not?" Qin Shi bitterly smiled. "The problem is that if Sir does not obey the Prince of Xiang, once the matter is over, he will assuredly kill you." The Prince of Zhongshan replied, "That's reasonable. Since His Majesty will not kill me, I will still support His Majesty." Qin Shi was stunned again, wondering where these words came from. Before he could say anything else, the Prince of Zhongshan's hand landed on his throat. His Highness's fingers were like iron. She really shouldn't have persuaded him to put down the bowl of jajang noodles. These were Qin Shi's last two thoughts. Even when his throat was crushed, he still could not understand how the prince knew of his private contact with the Prince of Xiang's estate and why he had done this. Qin Shi's corpse was dragged away, but the Prince of Zhongshan still felt very unhappy. He undid his clothes and vigorously fanned himself. A beautiful concubine walked in and quickly fanned him with a small fan. What the strategist couldn't understand, even at the moment of his death, this concubine saw it clearly. Even if the prince did not know that this strategist had a secret relationship with the Prince of Xiang's estate, he would not listen to his opinion, because the prince had never had a favorable opinion of the Prince of Xiang. Even though the rebel army situation was very good, even though Prince Qinlu had been a hostage for 10 years, he was still able to successfully convince so many courtiers. I heard that some people in the palace have also been convinced by Prince Qinlu. The concubine somewhat hesitantly glanced at the Prince of Zhongshan. The Prince of Zhongshan replied, "Tongues are like sabers and swords, but in the end, they're not real sabers and swords, so what use do they have?" The concubine sighed and filled the wine cup in front of him. The Prince of Xiang gazed out the window at the autumn sky, his hand gripping a small cup of wine. His mood was not as relaxed as his expression. The rebel army had taken control of the capital, but there was still some time before they could take the imperial palace. Just where did the Prince of Xiang's confidence come from? Why did he not care about Qin Changsheng in the slightest? The Prince of Zhongshan suddenly thought of something and smashed his wine cup on the table. He harshly yelled, "North Pacifying Army." From its name, one could see that the North Pacifying Army was the strongest army of the demi-human race. The North Pacifying Army was originally supposed to reinforce the human army and attack the demons. But not long after passing the Tsong Province Army headquarters, it stopped advancing north and began circling around the plains. At the start, many people believed that the demi-human race had gone back on their word. Later on, when two demi-human reinforcements suddenly appeared at Xiulao City, many people believed that the North Pacifying Army was acting as a cover for the two demi-human reinforcements. However, reality proved that all their guesses were wrong, or perhaps incomplete. Before those two demi-human reinforcements had passed through the mountains bordering the Elf Steppe to reach Xiulao City, the North Pacifying Army had already begun to move. A group of 20,000 demi-human warriors swiftly passed through the western Song Plateau. Under the deliberate permission of the garrison of Snowold Pass, they silently brushed past the left side of Tianliang County and finally reached the perimeter of the capital. Mount Amo had collapsed for 10 years and was now tinsome shallow hills, all sorts of wildflowers growing on them. As they passed through these hills, many demi-human warriors would have a wildflower on their collars. Many farmers along the way had already noticed the existence of this demi-human army. The people of the Great Zhou dynasty could often see demi-humans, but it was very rare for them to see so many muscular demi-human men at the same time. They inevitably felt somewhat uneasy but the thought that the demi-humans were allies of the humans prevented them from crying out in panic. The North Pacifying Army truly lived up to its reputation as the most elite of the demi-humans. Demi-human warriors were naturally undisciplined and undisciplined, but they still managed to maintain excellent military discipline during this long march. Even when they formally met up with the rebel army on the outskirts of the capital, there were no problems, and there was no chaos that many people feared. 20,000 valiant demi-human warriors had joined the rebel army, completely throwing the balance of power between the two sides out of balance. More importantly, the appearance of the North Pacifying Army in the capital represented the White Emperor's stance. Only now did everyone realize that the White Emperor and the Prince of Xiang had already formed an alliance. After the northern expedition against the demons concluded, the experts of the divine domain would presumably need a very long time to recuperate. Shang Xingzhou was old, and Wang Zhizi would not participate in worldly affairs. The Prince of Xiang and Qiao Yunping, two experts of the divine domain, and the White Emperor, a saint, truly had the right to determine the situation of the entire continent. The morale of the rebel army was boosted, but the front lines were still engaged in a decisive battle with the demons. Neither the princes, the generals, nor the soldiers could truly be confident. So even now, they had not used catapults or other large-scale siege weapons. But if this stalemate continued, blood would inevitably flow. The gates of the imperial city were tightly shut, the rebel army and the defending army constantly cursing at each other. The rebel army had not used siege weapons, perhaps for this very reason, but the divine crossbows on the walls of the imperial city had not been fired. However, the obscenities that fell into the ears of the rebel army were no better than the arrows flying through the air. Grand Tutor Bai Ying, supported by several civil officials, shakily walked up to the walls. Looking down at the rebel army, he used a sound-amplifying artifact to speak for some time. Seeing that the rebel army did not move, he couldn't help but grow angry. He began to shout at the Prince of Xiang, his words constantly repeating the phrase, "Eternal Curse." The rebel army parted like a tide. The Prince of Xiang rode to the front of the imperial city and said to Grand Tutor Bai Ying, "To be condemned by the masses and die without a cause. That is the weakling, not me." Grand Tutor Bai Ying was disappointed. He placed his hand on his chest as he was helped down by the officials. To be continued. Chapter 123. Mou appeared on the city wall. Her face was still as beautiful as ever, but she looked a little tired. The Prince of Luoyang nervously stood at her side, very worried that an arrow might fly out of nowhere. Mou said, "Since your highness has already made up your mind, Prince Chen Lu's life naturally cannot threaten you." Although he said that he wasn't a threat, he was still a threat. Many of the rebel soldiers were looking at the Prince of Xiang. The Prince of Xiang's eyes glistened with tears as he said, "My son died a worthy death with no regrets. He should be conferred the title of Crown Prince." Mou was very impressed and didn't say anything else. Prince Chen Lu's face was a little pale. Perhaps it was because the weather was a little gloomy, or perhaps it was because he hadn't seen the sun for a long time. He looked at the old eunuch and said, "I don't know how to repay the kindness of living again." Just like that beautiful concubine of the Prince of Zhongshan had been wary of, Prince Chen Lu was truly worthy of being publicly acknowledged as the descendant of the imperial clan most similar to Emperor Taizong. He possessed an unimaginable charisma. Even though he had been imprisoned in the palace for 10 years, not only had he not become dispirited, he had succeeded in obtaining the support of many people. The old eunuch was the most important person among them. This was the laundry department, the most messy and unobtrusive place on the east side of the imperial city. No one would have thought that he, who was supposed to be imprisoned in Weiyang Palace and heavily guarded, would actually be outside the imperial city. The old eunuch sighed and said nothing. He turned and walked into the imperial city. Prince Chen Lu looked up at the gloomy sky. He did not continue to think about what the old eunuch's sign meant, because it was meaningless. His eyes were even calmer than before, but there was an extremely faint trace of weariness in the depths of his eyes. The imperial city had already been surrounded by the rebel army. The demi-human North Pacifying Army was responsible for the southeast region, which was the direction between the Orthodox Academy and the 100 Garden. In particular, the Orthodox Academy had been surrounded so tightly that not even a drop of water could trickle through. It was even more heavily guarded than during the coup of the Mausoleum of Books. The teachers and students that remained in the academy were extremely nervous and did not know what to do. No one noticed that a seemingly thin and weak student had passed through the forest by the lake and arrived in front of the imperial city. This was the forbidden ground of the Orthodox Academy, and the gate leading to the imperial city had a powerful array attached to it. Moreover, it had a lock that was very difficult to open. The thin and weak student didn't care about these rules at all. He easily broke the formation, took out a key from his sleeve, and opened the old lock covered in green copper rust. She was no ordinary student. She was very familiar with the Imperial Palace and the Orthodox Academy. To be more accurate, she was the vice principal of the Orthodox Academy. When Prince Chun Lu fled the palace, Luo Luo quietly sneaked into the palace. She brought the greetings of the Orthodox Academy to the emperor, as well as a certain variable. The White Emperor had sent the North Pacifying Army to express his support for the Prince of Xiang. But she was in the palace. Would the North Pacifying Army really dare to attack the palace? More importantly, would the North Pacifying Camp listen to her orders and change their stance? No one knew how the situation would develop. Even now, the rebel army did not know that Luo Luo had entered the imperial palace. But Prince Chen Lu felt a bad omen. The wind from the west was too humid, or the well water was too sweet. There were always some inexplicable details that made people think of many things. He had just escaped from the imperial palace and did not have the time to talk with his father for a long time before he made his request very forcefully. Regardless of whether the imperial design could be opened or not, the rebel army should still attack the imperial city and exert even more pressure. The imperial design can only stop experts like you and Uncle Chow, but it can't stop ordinary people. And there are still many places in the capital that need to be controlled. The Prince of Xiang could not oppose Prince Chun Lu's pale face and gloomy eyes. Battles would naturally occur between control and resistance, and blood would flow. When the situation became even more chaotic, some houses would even be set on fire. With Prince Chun Lu's return, the movements of the rebel army became much more intense. On the evening of the same day, many fires appeared in the capital. The two sides that had controlled themselves for many days finally began to lose control. In the streets and alleys around the imperial palace and the Li Palace, scenes of burning, killing, and looting appeared. In Prince Chun Lu's view, these were all prices that had to be endured for success, so he didn't need to care. He was concerned about more important matters. He personally led the 300-some rebel cavalry to the Orthodox Academy. One temple of Xining rules the world. Prince Chen Lu said these words as he gazed at the gate of the Orthodox Academy. These words had been circulating in the continent for 10-some years, and they were even on the verge of becoming a truth, a sort of faith of the populace. If one wanted to destroy these words, they first had to destroy the Orthodox Academy. But this gate was truly very familiar. Many years ago, in an autumn rain, Tianhai Xingxue had returned from the north, bringing with him his generals to smash the gate of the Orthodox Academy into ruins. Jin Yulu had defeated divine General Fei Dian, and then there was the Ivy Festival. The Orthodox Academy had never repaired the gate precisely so that it could slap the Tianhai clan in the face. Only in the grand examination did Tianhai Xingxue finally concede and personally lead a group of people to repair the gate, thus creating yet another story of the capital. That period just happened to be the beginning of the close relationship between Prince Chun Lu and the Orthodox Academy. When the gate was repaired, he had even personally seen the design and given his opinion. To put it another way, he had also contributed to the current gate. At that time, the ivy in front of the gate had been completely removed, leaving the smooth stone surface uncovered. Now, the ivy had grown back, concealing the majority of the words. "Smash it open." Prince Chun Lu calmly uttered these two words. The rebel soldiers brought their prepared fighting logs forward. Under the confused gazes of the demi-human soldiers, they smashed against the gate. With several thunderous bangs, several cracks appeared on the gate of the Orthodox Academy, and with a crack, the gates slowly fell to the sides. The night was gradually getting late. The rebel soldiers and demi-human soldiers had all lit torches. The light of the torches illuminated the depths of the 100 Flowers Lane, illuminated the shattered gate, and illuminated many young faces. Those faces were all very young, and it was obvious that they were very nervous. In their eyes, one could clearly see the fear. But not a single person left, because they were the teachers and students of the Orthodox Academy. Prince Chenlu was rather surprised, not because of this sight, but because the person standing at the very front of the teachers and students of the Orthodox Academy was Tianhai Xingxue. The light of the torches clearly illuminated Tianhai Xingxue's face. Prince Chenlu felt that the affairs of the world were truly wondrous. He smiled, but it was somewhat bitter. It was a cloudy day in Xiulao City, especially cloudy. The clouds were especially thick, completely obscuring the sun. The streets of the city were so gloomy that it seemed like it was still before dawn. From time to time, one could hear the barking of dogs and the sounds of chasing and fighting. The resistance of the demon soldiers continued. They were clearly not organized, but they still brought many problems to the human armies. The cavalry galloped along the straight and wide streets. Fireworks would occasionally light up, and it was only in the evening that the intensity of the battle began to gradually weaken until it finally died down. Xiulao City was very large. In order to clear the roadblocks and fend off the occasional ambushing demon experts, the procession could not advance too quickly. In addition, there was another important reason. It was only in the evening that Chun Changsheng and Su Yurong's divine carriage finally arrived at the imperial city, which was lined with buildings. They were still very far from the demon palace. A flower of fire bloomed at the very front of the procession, spraying out a jade-like light that drove away the deepening darkness. If someone were very close, they would be able to see that this torch was neither gold nor jade, but made of opaque glass. Its surface was milky white, but its interior was filled with countless crystalline granules that seemed to contain an endless amount of energy. This was the divine artifact of the demons, the white sun flame. In that war, several hundred years ago, Emperor Taizong and his generals had seized this divine artifact from the battlefield. They had then brought it back to the capital and placed it in the Lingyan Pavilion. Today, it had been brought back by the human armies to Xiulao City, but this did not mean that it had returned home. It was more like a legacy of some powerful will. Some demon commoners had been driven out of their homes and stood on the two sides of the street. Some poor demons stood in front of the ruined buildings, curiously watching the human armies advance toward the demon palace. Whispers could be heard at the sight of that jade-like flame. For some reason, some of the demon commoners gradually began to kneel. To be continued. Chapter 124. Other than the legendary white sun flame, the demon populace were more concerned about that divine carriage and that small carriage. When they thought about how the human pope and holy maiden were in the carriage, even though they were defeated, they couldn't help but feel curious and excited. In the snowy plains of the land of demons, Chun Changsheng was very famous, while Su Yurong was even more famous because of the demon lord's passionate confession. But who was in that small carriage? The populace was very confused as to why a human could be ranked ahead of the Pope and Holy Maiden. As speculation spread, the populace learned that this was the teacher of the human emperor and the Pope, Shang Xingzhou. It was said that he was on par with Wang Jizhe. Shang Xingzhou ignored the curious gazes from the sides of the street. His gaze was also brimming with curiosity as it rested on the buildings lining the street. He had come to Xiulao City before and read through countless related documents, but this was his first time entering the city. To him, this capital of the demon race was both strange and familiar, brimming with an intoxicating sense of unreality. Just like those buildings, they truly were very beautiful, but also very illogical. Just what did those spires that soared into the clouds symbolize? Why was it that the windows were clearly inlaid with glass as blue as the ocean, allowing the most dazzling sunlight to enter, so sinister and sinister, like a true netherworld? The most magnificent building appeared before everyone's eyes. Even in the pitch-black, starless night, it was still striking, like a true mountain. It was the Demon Palace. The tinsome Zhang-tall gate of the Demon Palace was already broken, and light blue flames could be seen at its edges, probably related to the materials used. The small carriage stopped outside the Demon Palace, not entering, so the entire convoy stopped. Time slowly passed, but the small carriage remained motionless, and no sound came from within. Countless gazes fell on the small carriage. The Tang old master walked to the side of the small carriage. Chun Changsheng and Su Yurong also walked to the side of the small carriage. The Tang old master asked through the azure curtain, "Are we going in?" The azure curtain was raised, revealing Shang Xingzhou's face. He asked, "Is it about time?" The Tang old master turned to Chun Changsheng. After a moment of silence, Chun Changsheng nodded. They had entered the city in the morning and only now arrived at the Demon Palace. Besides the reasons mentioned earlier, the most important reason was that he had ordered the entire convoy to circle around Xiulao City, ensuring that they passed through all the famous streets and saw all the famous buildings. "It's about time," the Tang old master said. "Then this is it." Shang Xingzhou let out a satisfied sigh and closed his eyes. It was silent in front of the Demon Palace. The sounds of battle in the distance and the light from the fireworks that lit up the night sky could clearly be heard here. After some time, the Tang old master stepped forward and lowered the curtain. Chun Changsheng walked to the front of the carriage and carried the young Taoist down. The little Taoist knew who he was, so he wasn't afraid and hugged him tightly. Chun Changsheng noticed that the little Taoist's sleeves were tied very tightly, and there were some bloodstains on his face. He knew that they were left behind from the past few days of treating the soldiers. "You have an uncle whose sleeves are cut very short. It's very convenient. I'll do it for you in the future." The little Taoist nodded and said, "All right." Su Yurong stepped forward and took him from Chun Changsheng's arms. The little Taoist had never seen Su Yurong before, but he still behaved very obediently. Chun Changsheng walked into the Demon Palace. Su Yurong carried the little Taoist and followed behind. The little Taoist looked at the carriage and finally couldn't help but cry. "Is the old ancestor dead?" Chun Changsheng didn't say anything and didn't turn around. The Tang old master followed, his hands held behind his back. Wampa had come. He was prepared to pull the small carriage into the Demon Palace. "I'll do it." Xiao Zhang took over the task. Everyone knew that the most suitable person for this task was Chun Changsheng, but they also knew why he was unwilling to stop. The sounds of fighting in the Demon Palace gradually came to a stop. Some of the palace halls had begun to blaze, but they were quickly extinguished. Even though they were occupied, everything seemed to be in order. Just like Chun Changsheng's footsteps, they were steady and rhythmic, neither hurried nor slow. But he could not clearly see the appearance of the halls in the Demon Palace. These halls were built from the extremely rare black stone and had an extremely majestic aura. Moreover, different halls had different styles and colors. When these techniques, commonly seen in Xiulao City's paintings, were applied to these buildings, they truly were astonishing, exuding a rich and dazzling sense of beauty. But in his eyes, these were all blurry patches of color. In the depths of the Demon Palace was a field of sunflowers. It occupied an extremely vast area, looking like a yellow sea. Even on this cold and cheerless autumn night, it still exuded an aura of boundless warmth. The group stepped through the sea of sunflowers and proceeded deeper. They sensed that the warmth around them was gradually growing colder, while an evil and gloomy energy like the darkness of the night was growing stronger. It was recorded in the Taoist scriptures that this energy was the Qi of the abyss, one of the sources of the demon race's power. The Demon Palace was at the edge of the abyss, so it seemed like it really wasn't far. The yellow sunflowers parted like the tide, and an incomparably tall palace that was completely black in color appeared before everyone's eyes. Through the stone steps that were severally long, the group entered the Demon Palace. Only now was Chun Changsheng's vision no longer blurry, though it was still somewhat red. The space within the Demon Palace was enormous. There was not a single stone pillar to support it, and it was entirely built from massive black stones. At every set distance, one would see a painting, a person, a landscape, a flower, or even a simple brush stroke. All of them seemed to contain a great deal of wisdom. Starting from the gate of the demon palace, the group had not encountered any demons, nor had there been any here. It was abnormally deserted. A dark green light suddenly appeared in front of the group, stabbing at Chun Changxing's forehead. Even at this distance, the group could sense the poison on it. Chun Changxing was very familiar with this green light. It was Nang's peacock plume. Su Yurong said something to the young Taoist boy in her bosom, but she did not raise her head. The dagger flew through the air and accurately stabbed at the green light. Just when Chun Changxing was prepared to receive Nang's strange attack, the green light vanished in the air. Soon after, a series of collisions came from above the demon palace, and then snowflakes drifted down. With a loud bang, the two figures landed heavily on the ground. Even the hard black rocks were smashed into several cracks. As the dust settled, a black-clothed girl restrained Nank. "Why have you become so much weaker?" The black-clothed girl asked Nank in confusion. Chun Changxing looked at Nank's pale face and was also rather surprised. He didn't know what she had endured in the days she had been back in Xiulao City. "I truly regret that I should have killed you the moment I saw you in the Garden of Zhou." Nank ignored the black-clothed girl and stared at Chun Changxing's face, her voice brimming with boundless hatred. Chun Changxing was quiet for a while. Without replying, he continued deeper into the demon palace. Nank gazed at his back and shouted in despair, "Will you only be satisfied when we all die? No, I just want you to surrender." Chun Changxing silently gazed at the small carriage, then repeated, "Surrender." Today, the television drama series Choosing Heaven began airing on Hunan television. The novel has also reached this point, and I feel a little emotional. When I was young, I would often hear people say, "Let's stop here, let's stop here." For some reason, I felt very sorrowful. While I was writing about the year of Qingyu, I wrote that song in Ixio. It was also very sorrowful. I wish everyone a happy life, and Shang Xingzhou will last through the ages. To be continued. Chapter 125. The black-clothed girl shook her head, released Nank, and walked to Chun Changxing's side. There were quite a few divine domain experts in the group. Although they were all rather injured, they could still fight. In Nank's current state, she posed no threat. Nank's face paled even more. She weakly stood up from the ground and walked over. No one glanced at her, but some people were very curious about the black-clothed girl. As the chilly wind blew and the black rocks they passed were covered in a thin layer of frost, many people had already guessed at the black-clothed girl's identity. It turned out that she had not been on that warm island in the south. She had always been here. As expected, she was the Pope's protector. Chun Changxing had long ago guessed that she was in the army. In the crucial moment of the second phase of the campaign, the North Third Camp of the Eastern Army had encountered a demon freak. Several thousand vultures carrying gunpowder flew at the camp, but in the end, they inexplicably dropped to the ground, igniting countless waterfalls of Tao flames on the plains. Many people could not understand why this had happened, but it was the effect of her pressure as a high-class divine being. In the following battles, Gigi had rendered great service several times, especially a few days ago. Under the cover of all the demons in Xiulao City, Gao Huan had led 1,000-some wolf cavalry down Nuoralang and attacked the human grain caravans. In the end, he had been killed by the Tang Old Master, but many of the grain carts had also been set ablaze. Before dying, Gao Huan had seen the flames on those grain carts extinguish. He had been extremely confused, even unable to die in peace. This was also one of her methods. Water and sand would find it very difficult to extinguish a strange flame, but to a black frost dragon, it was no problem at all. Chun Changxing asked, "You're not angry anymore?" Gigi very matter-of-factly said, "You're not willing to marry me, so of course I should be angry." Chun Changxing asked, "Then why did you help me?" Gigi replied, "If the humans lose, you will definitely die. When that happens, who will I marry?" This truly was a problem. Chun Changxing could not give an answer. Su Yurong suddenly asked, "Do you know why you've never been able to reach adulthood?" Gigi was somewhat confused, thinking, why is that? Su Yurong explained, it's not because the array under New North Bridge has damaged your mind, but because you've always wanted to mate with other people, delaying your cultivation. Gigi was infuriated upon hearing this. She wanted to retort, but didn't know where to start. With a red face, she shouted, don't you want to? The little Taoist raised his head from Su Yurong's bosom and thought curiously, what are they arguing about? Su Yurong stretched out her finger and shook it. Her meaning was very clear, but also a little unclear. The reason why they were still quarreling like children at this time was actually very simple. They were a little nervous. Everyone had already walked to the deepest part of the Devil Hall and could see the black devil flames. They could also sense the aura of the abyss behind the devil flames. The black demonic flames were like the constantly changing color of the night. It was not tranquil and contained an inexhaustible amount of energy. It was extremely terrifying. A young man stood in front of the demonic flames. He was dressed in a long white robe, and his hair was disheveled. He looked like a poet who had lost his country, or a sorrowful singer. People were nervous not because they were afraid, but because history was about to happen, right in front of their eyes. The demon lord turned around and used his fingers to carelessly tidy his hair. He said to Chun Changsheng, the only thing I don't understand is that the Prince of Xiang and Chao Yunping are in the capital at this time, and the White Emperor might even have gone, because his venerable self doesn't want me to die. How can you not care? His gaze fell on the small carriage. Realizing that there was no smoke in the carriage, he said with mixed emotions, even if this student of yours has a one-track mind, how can you not care? It suddenly began to rain in the capital. The droplets of rain pierced through the light from the torches and landed on the ivy outside the Orthodox Academy, clattering against each other. Prince Chun Lu gazed at Tianhai Xingxue, the smile on his lips gradually fading. In these 10 years, the emperor's attitude toward the Tianhai clan had been very ordinary, but he had treated Tianhai Xingxue rather well. The year before last, he had chosen Tianhai Xingxue for an important post in the Ministry of the Army. In the early spring, Tianhai Xingxue fell seriously ill, so he could not follow the army to the front lines. At the end of the summer, he had secretly gotten in touch with MOU and had the palace invite several bishops of the Li Palace. Only then did his illness gradually recover. He no longer cared about what sort of filth was hidden in this matter, but when he saw those familiar faces in the rebel army, he still felt a faint pain in his chest. Back then, your grandaunt said that all of you were a bunch of trash. Now, it seemed like she was right. Tianhai Xingxue looked at his cousins and jeered. Not a single one of you has any guts. Tianhai Chimu rode out of the crowd, his face dark as he asked, do you know what you're doing? Tianhai Xingxue replied, Father, do you know what you're doing? The people are fighting the demons, but you want to rebel. Do you have any shame? His voice clearly spread through the autumn rain, and the rebel soldiers all had rather unnatural expressions. 100 Flowers Lane was quiet, the sound of rain falling on the ivy rather vexing. Prince Chun Lu wiped the rain from his face and looked down at Tianhai Xingxue from atop his horse, his expression indifferent. I only know that I will be the future emperor. Just who are you? After saying this, he raised his right hand, preparing to order the rebel cavalry to begin their charge. Just like many years ago, in a similar autumn rain, Tianhai Xingxue had done the same thing. Tianhai Xingxue's face was rather pale. He knew that he alone could not stop so many rebel soldiers. Sima Yu, Chan Fuge, Chu Wenbin, and the other experts of the Orthodox Academy were all on the front lines, let alone Zhixiu and Tang 36. How many teachers and students would soon lie in pools of blood? Would the Orthodox Academy be reduced to ruins? Without any warning, Prince Chenlu's right hand fell heavily, as if he was chopping down a tree, simple and forceful. At this moment, a mystical sight appeared. An extremely thick scholar tree suddenly snapped in half. A loud bang resounded. The severed scholar tree smashed into Prince Chenlu. With a wail, the warhorse was crushed to death. Prince Chun Lu fell into the rain, his body covered in blood. The entire world fell silent. The crowd stared at that stalwart figure in the rain, so shocked that they couldn't speak. Just who was this stalwart figure that he could single-handedly grab a massive tree and use it as a weapon, that he could so easily strike down Prince Chenlu? Prince Chenlu was a true expert at the upper level of star condensation. Even if he was ambushed, how could he appear so powerless? And this wasn't even considering the fact that Tianhai Chenwu, with his unfathomable cultivation, was at Prince Chenlu's side. How could he not react? The autumn rain grew heavier and heavier, falling upon the leaves of the broken tree and then incessantly falling. Tianhai Chenwu coldly snorted, his right palm slashing at the man in the rain. Prince Chenlu had been ambushed and heavily injured in front of his eyes. Afterwards, he would find it very difficult to explain himself to the Prince of Xiang. Moreover, he was shocked by his opponent's methods, so he naturally attacked with all his strength, holding nothing back. The edge of his palm was suffused with crystalline starlight, just like a real metal weapon. It cut through the autumn rain and air with a shrill hiss. The stalwart man had no intention of retreating. He raised his right fist to meet the attack. Crack! A bolt of lightning appeared in the night sky, descending right in front of the Orthodox Academy. It transformed into bolts of lightning that coiled around his thick arm. The lightning guiding formula. The moment fist and palm met, the rain seemed to freeze in the air. Tianhai Chenwu was forced back several dozen zhong, only stopping after smashing through a restaurant, a trickle of blood trickling from the corner of his lips. The stalwart man was still standing at his original position, his expression unchanged. Only now did many people notice that he hadn't even put down the tree he was hugging. Just who was this stalwart man? Was he already half a step from the divine? Although his face was covered in a beard, his appearance was still very young. But how could this be? Prince Chenlu looked at the stalwart man's face and found it rather familiar, but he couldn't remember where. He asked, "Who are you?" The stalwart man replied, "I am the Orthodox Academy's Xianyuan Per." "And who are you?" Chapter 126. Xianyuan loosened his grip. With a muffled sound, the heavy broken tree fell to the ground, splashing a lot of rainwater. 100 Flowers Lane was silent. The rebel soldiers looked at the burly figure with shock in their eyes. A hint of a smile appeared in Tianhai Shengshua's eyes, as well as a tinge of sorrow. The students of the Orthodox Academy behind him, on the other hand, had looks of admiration and reverence. Xianyuan Po was very famous, but the main reason was that his deeds were very legendary. In the eyes of many, he was second only to Pope Chen Changsheng. More than 10 years ago, he was a genius of the Yao race that Star Taker Academy focused on training. Because his right arm was crippled by Tianhai Air, he didn't care about the dissuasion and insisted on dropping out of school. He made a living washing dishes in the night market of the capital. But in the end, he was picked up by Chen Changsheng and Luo and brought back to the Tradition Academy. He was even ahead of Tang 36 and became the beginning of the revival of the Tradition Academy. Several years later, during the coup of the Mausoleum of Books, Chen Changsheng and the Orthodox Academy were in a precarious situation. Xianyuan wanted to return to White Emperor City to ask for help, but in the end, he came back empty-handed. He spent his days working in a tavern in the lower city district of White Emperor City. He was even misunderstood by the people of the world, who knew how many cold eyes and mockery he had suffered, but he had never thought of defending himself. At the grand ceremony of returning to Origin, when Madame Mu intended to marry Luo off to the Demon Lord, he used the identity of Xianyuan Pe of the Orthodox Academy to ascend the fighting platform. He began to fight from the most remote fighting platform in the lower city districts, and he won one match after another. In the end, he won 9 matches in a row, forcing his way to the final battle. Although he was defeated by the Demon Lord, he still shocked the 2 shores of the Red River and the entire continent. 10 years passed after that. The old and young of the Orthodox Academy had now become the illustrious great generals of the demi-human race. In terms of pure fighting prowess, he was the strongest. When the lightning guiding art that Chen Changsheng had taught him and the fist style that Bianghong had taught him fused together, even Zhixio found it impossible to directly block their edge. Everyone believed that Xianyuan Po was outside Shualao City, leading the demi-human reinforcements in a desperate battle against the demon army. Who could have imagined that he would appear in the Orthodox Academy? With just a little thought, one could guess that he had probably hidden himself in the demi-human North Pacifying Army and sneaked into the capital. Prince Chun Lu thought of a certain possibility, and his face turned even paler. He wanted to warn the rebel soldiers outside. A sword light illuminated the autumn rain as it slashed towards Prince Chun Lu. That sword light was a little strange. It was not the usual snow-white color, and it did not feel sharp. It was not cold either. Instead, it had a hint of summer heat. Prince Chun Lu's sleeves fluttered as he pulled out his flexible sword and barely managed to block the attack. His body flew backward and smashed into a stone wall before fainting. Xianyuan Po's right arm had long since recovered. He held a thick and heavy metal sword in his hand. It was the Mountain Sea Sword. In the past, Prince Chun Lu had been a frequent visitor of the Orthodox Academy, so he naturally recognized him. He had intentionally asked who he was purely out of anger. You actually want to destroy the Orthodox Academy. Anyone who dares to take a step into the Tradition Academy will be killed without mercy. Tianhai Chenwu walked out of the dilapidated restaurant, the front of his clothes stained with blood. He was originally prepared to save Prince Chun Lu, but when he saw the Mountain Sea Sword in Xianyuan Po's hand, he changed his mind with great determination. He led the descendants of the Tianhai clan out of the alley. Just as he was about to exit 100 Flowers Lane, Tianhai Chenwu couldn't help but turn his head to glance at the gate of the Orthodox Academy. Under the illumination of the torch and the curtain-like autumn rain, Tianhai Shengshue's figure was somewhat indistinct. Tianhai Chenwu sighed in his heart. He had believed that his plans were flawless, that he was vicious and merciless, that he had pushed the two words thick and black to the extreme, that he did not care about the notoriety of being a fence-sitter. Thus, the Tianhai clan would assuredly continue to survive in these perilous times. If they encountered a certain opportunity, the Tianhai clan under his command might even welcome a second period of prosperity. But in the end, he had still suffered a crushing defeat. On the contrary, that cold and proud son of his had done nothing, only acted according to his heart, yet he had always stood on the side of the victor. Could it be that what his aunt had said to him back then had really been correct? That every scheme and calculation was wrong? But why was this? The battle between the North Pacifying Army and the Rebel Army began outside the Orthodox Academy. The heaven-shaking sounds of fighting continued for a very long time. This place was not far from the Imperial Palace, only separated by the Orthodox Academy, or perhaps the 100 Herb Garden. However, perhaps because the forest outside the palace was too dense, or because it was protected by an array, one could not hear too many sounds of fighting from within the Imperial Palace. One could only faintly hear a few shouts. Tonight, the Imperial Palace was extremely cold and cheerless. If one looked down from a dew platform, one would not see a single person. Only careful observation would reveal that in the pavilions, in the shrubs by the ponds, and in the remote corner rooms were many palace maids and eunuchs. Those palace maids and eunuchs were pale, their bodies trembling in extreme fear. But the reason they were hiding here and not escorting the emperor in the main hall was not because they were afraid, but because they had received an order from their superiors. There were many night pearls in the main hall of the Imperial Palace. Although they could not compare to the dew platform, nor could they compare to the cave beneath New North Bridge, they were enough to illuminate the hall as if it were daytime. The veil rustled, and the light emitted by the night pearls danced like snowflakes. Alas, no one was in the mood to appreciate them. The ministers led by Grand Tutor Bai Ying stared at the figure at the door of the hall, their faces brimming with shock and anger. To rule the world with benevolence and righteousness, the imperial court is also a part of the world. My adopted sons understood my intentions and had those pitiful children hide so that they would not be harmed by tonight's weapons. This can also be considered an act of benevolence and righteousness. If Lady Mother understood this principle, why would she have been buried in the 100 Herb Garden and not buried with Emperor Xian? Eunuch Lin's gaze moved from Grand Tutor Bai Ying to the ministers and guards, ultimately resting on the highest point. Mo and the Prince of Luyang stood there, protecting a person behind them, a smear of bright yellow faintly visible. There might be some problems outside the palace, but that's not important because this is the most important place in the Great Zhou. And I've lived in this imperial palace for far too many years, even longer than all of you combined. It is not too difficult to stop the imperial design. I hope that your majesty can understand. Who could have expected that eunuch Lin, renowned throughout the continent for his loyalty to the sovereign and his noble and unsullied morals, would actually become a spy for the rebel army and help the Prince of Xiang break the imperial design? Grand Tutor Baiying trembled as he took 2 steps forward. Looking at eunuch Lin, he said, "Old Lin, I have served with you for more than 200 years and am well aware of your character. Even now, you still remember those lowly eunuchs and palace maids. This means that those reputations are not false. Then why did you commit such a disgraceful act?" Eunuch Lin replied, "How can a man of character be burdened by his reputation?" He was a eunuch, but he had always considered himself a man of character. Moreover, no one in the world dared to question him, and even now, it was very difficult for people to doubt him. Grand Tutor Baiying painfully asked, "Could it be that you want to erase your reputation as a loyal minister?" "Of course I'm a loyal minister, but I'm loyal to Emperor Xian." Eunuch Lin gazed at that figure at the highest point, separated by the crowd, and said, "Your Majesty, I also deeply respect you, and I even like you more and more. Alas, you are still that woman's son. The more I respect you, the less I respect myself. The more I like you, the less I like myself. So please forgive this old subject's offense today." These words were rather difficult to understand. Only Mou understood them, and because she was a woman, she let out a laugh of ridicule. Eunuch Lin paid no attention to her laughter and took a step forward. The guards were extremely nervous, the metal blades in their hands unsheathing. The Prince of Luoyang's face was pale, and his forehead was covered in sweat. He constantly muttered, "What do we do? What do we do?" But he never lowered his arms, appearing abnormally resolute. Like an old hen protecting its chick, he shielded that person behind him. Mou was somewhat annoyed by his nagging, but when she saw his appearance out of the corner of her eye, her heart softened. She softly said, "In a little while, when it gets chaotic, take his majesty and leave." The Prince of Luyang froze, then turned to her and asked, "This is the place you spoke of that night?" Mou replied, "You're so stupid. I had you memorize it 20 times, and you still haven't memorized it?" The Prince of Luyang suddenly began to cry, saying, "I've memorized it, but I don't want to leave you behind." The imperial design had been broken, and the Prince of Xiang and Chao Yunping, 2 experts of the divine domain, could appear at any moment. The emperor had to leave through the secret path before this happened. And you had to stay behind to block eunuch Lin and also draw the attention of others. So the final conclusion could naturally be imagined. Mou and the Prince of Luyang did not speak very loudly. Other than themselves, only that person could hear them. But at this moment, an evaluation of their conversation suddenly came from outside the hall. "Sincere and sincere, because it is true, sincere, without the slightest falsehood or pretentiousness. You're truly worthy of being the student personally taught by Imperial Mother. Lady Mo, I truly admire you." The Prince of Xiang walked into the hall. With a reminiscent expression, he said, "Back then, when I thought about how you and Luer grew up together, I wrote a letter to Imperial Mother to grant you a marriage. Alas, Imperial Mother did not agree." Chao Yunping was in the back, his hands clasped behind his back as he looked around the hall. From time to time, he would say a few words of praise, just like an unemployed, old official from the Ministry of Revenue picking out grains from a sweet potato field. The Prince of Xiang stopped reminiscing and said, "Eunuch Lin is right. Even if we completely lose outside, what does it matter? It's fine as long as we win here. As long as I can sit on this throne, both Mount Li and the Li Palace will have to respect me. So what do I have to worry about?" Mou said, "Your Highness, sitting on this throne has never been such a simple matter. Have none of you seen how much weight I've gotten in these last 10 years? The Prince of Xiang's hands rested on his abdomen, pinching the fat protruding from his belt as he bitterly smiled. His smile gradually faded as he turned to the high ground behind the crowd and said, "As the belt grows wider, there is no regret. Your Majesty, little brother, can you let me sit on this chair? In truth, I have never thought about sitting on this chair." A voice rang out in the quiet hall. That person's first two words were extremely jerky, like an infant that had just learned to speak. Following that, that person's pronunciation improved. It could not be said to be smooth, but at least it did not seem strange. It was just that it was particularly slow and would occasionally stop. The reason for this was because that person had not spoken for many years. To be continued,